Just about 3 weeks after my wife was put in the ground, I was still wearing the same black jacket. It still had that faint smell of flowers, those lilies from the funeral. I just stood there, looking out the window, watching the lake freeze over when the phone rang. My son Hans didn't waste any time on condolences. "Hey, Pop, sell the lake house," he says. "Prices are through the roof." 4 weeks later, my daughter Gretchen called. "Same deal. Move into my basement. We can get a killer offer for the place." 2 weeks, 2 calls. Both of them were talking about my house like I was already gone. I didn't get into an argument. I just stared at the ice and thought, you got no idea what you've just started. See, there's a secret hidden in this place. My wife Clara left me something that's gonna totally mess up their plans. I kept the jacket on even after I hung up. The kitchen was warm, and the old baseboards were creaking and popping as they got used to the heat, but the coat had a weight to it that felt right. If grief is a heavy thing, this jacket gave it a place to sit. If I put my hand to the collar, I could still catch that scent of lilies. Clean, waxy, a sweet smell that had no business being here in the dead of winter. On the windowsill, a ring of frost had sneaked in under some old caulk. I'd always said I'd get around to fixing it in the spring, but I never did. Clara used to say that was the whole charm of this place. There was always something that needed fixing, and that meant there was always a reason to stay. The wind pushed a thin layer of snow across the lake's surface. From a distance, the ice looked rock solid, but I knew better. There were dark cracks running through the white, like veins in a hand. Take a wrong step out there, and you'd figure out real fast which lines were just on the surface and which ones were the truth. I tapped the windowpane with my knuckles, a thing us guys do to make sure everything's still real. Hans's call came on a Wednesday at 10:14 a.m. I remember because Clara's kitchen clock, the one with the creamy enamel and a little crack over the two, was always 5 minutes slow, and I was used to adding that time back. "Dad, sell the lake house. Prices are high." He said it so flat, like he was telling me what the weather was gonna do. He's got that realtor voice now. Even when he's talking to his old man, he's totally unfazed, sure of himself, a voice built to close a deal. When he was 13 and his baseball team lost in the semifinals, he cried so hard his whole body shook. He hated to lose. He learned to hide that shake, though. Gretchen's call came on Saturday after she got off work. I could hear her keyboard going in the background, like the rumble of a subway under a city, proof that things are still moving, no matter what's happening up above. "Move into my basement. We'll get a great offer for the house." She sounded so efficient, so generous. "Move down here, Pop. There's a full bathroom. You'll have your own private entrance." She'd even hung a small chandelier down there, she told me, so it wouldn't feel like a basement. She thought a little light could just rename a room. They weren't terrible kids. That's what makes this kind of thing so tricky. You can swat away cruelty like it's a fly. They were just being practical. They had their spreadsheets and used words like liquidity and resale, and they honestly thought practicality was a good thing. Maybe it is when you're in your 30s and every single choice is about getting somewhere faster. When you're in your late 70s, you start to get that some things are supposed to take their time. A house, a marriage, a garden that takes 6 years to learn what your hands want. I put a coffee mug on the counter and forgot to pour the coffee. That's been happening a lot lately. I go through all the motions, but the cup stays empty. I told myself I was gonna change that habit, just like I was gonna fix that caulk. I rinsed the mug out anyway, because some chores are really just a different kind of prayer. On the kitchen table was a manila folder from the funeral home, all the receipts, the death certificate, and that little pamphlet about grief groups that meet on Wednesdays in a church basement that smells like lemon oil and old overcoats. I'd laid it out, meaning to be all grown up and organized about the paperwork. I shut it and slid it into the drawer with the napkin rings, half a deck of cards, and a bottle opener shaped like a fish that Clara bought for a couple of bucks at a church sale because she liked how its silly mouth opened up for anything. I grabbed a yellow legal pad off the fridge and made 3 columns, an old habit from my days as an engineer, when bridges were just decisions you could figure out. I wrote down, what they know, what they don't, and what I want them to think. Under what they know, I wrote, Mom is gone. Dad lives alone at the lake. Winter is hard on the old place. 3 simple lines, all true enough. Under what they don't, I didn't write anything at first. The pencil just hung there over the paper like it was waiting for permission. Finally, I wrote, Clara kept her own counsel. Then, in smaller letters, so do I. I just left the last column blank for now. It's not that I was planning to mess with my kids. It's just that I didn't feel like being an open book anymore, written in a language anyone could read. The sunlight in March in the north is like a hammer. It comes right through the big south window and hits the kitchen table in long squares. It makes you think everything is cleaner than it is until you turn your head and see all the dust motes doing their slow dance in the air above the wood. Clara would sometimes wave a cloth through the air just to mess up their choreography. I used to tell her she couldn't clean the air. She'd say, watch me. In the afternoon, I went out on the porch and swept the thin layer of snow off the steps. You don't really need to sweep snow, if the weather keeps up, the wind will do it for you. But sweeping gives a man something to do with his hands while he's thinking. Across the lake, the Richter place was dark. In the summer, you can see their kayaks leaned up against the boathouse and Mrs. Richter's laundry like little flags, sheets, towels, a line of blue shirts her husband wears while he's pretending to be retired. The house looked like it was holding its breath, just like mine was. I heard some tires on the road and did that old man thing of pretending not to look. It was a delivery van. The driver hopped out, left a long, skinny box next to the mailbox, and took off without even knocking. The box was the right size for a chandelier. I didn't go get it. I went back inside and hung my jacket on the hook by the door. The whole house shifted its temperature around me as I moved, the way a pond ripples when you step into it. I don't think houses are alive, but I do believe they know who has learned all their little noises. The radiator in the small bathroom gives a single tick at 4 p.m. in the winter. The dining room window rattles when the wind comes from the west. The second step from the top always groans more under your left foot than your right. You only learn all this by living there long enough to stop watching your feet. That night, I finally slept in our bed for the first time since Clara had passed. I'd been on the couch in the den with the TV off and the blanket Clara made for Lise folded over me like a draft notice. The bed held me differently. It's a strange thing to find out that mattresses have a weight memory and that not having a person there can change how cotton feels. I lay on my side and reached my hand out to where she used to sleep, the way they do in the movies. I waited to feel like an idiot. I didn't. What I felt was true. The sheet was cool. The emptiness wasn't some dramatic show, it was just a part of the landscape. In the morning, I made coffee and actually poured it this time. Progress, as Clara would say, always gets a parade. My phone buzzed with a text from Gretchen. Hey, Pop. Just checking in. We can start showing the place in a couple of weeks. It's a great time. The basement is 90% ready. Love you. At the end, there was a heart emoji, which is what people use now for, I'm being serious. I just stared at that little red heart like it had fangs. I typed back, morning. I'll let you know. And I put the phone face down. Hans called at 11:11 a.m. His calendar must be a grid of blocks where he jams in a human life. Dad, I've got a cash buyer, he said. No inspection. They want to close fast. That place is becoming a real maintenance headache, right? The roof, taxes, snow, medical stuff. I'm just trying to make this simple. He made that last word sound like it was the most important thing in the world and only he could provide it. It's not a headache, I said. The roof is solid, taxes are paid, and my knees can still handle the stairs. Come on, he laughed, short and sharp. Why are you fighting this? You'll be closer to us. Gretchen's got the basement, and I can come up on the weekends. We'll take care of you. I'm not a chore, I said. He let out a sigh. You're being stubborn, Dad. Sometimes, being stubborn is all that's left of a man's dignity, I told him, and he went quiet in a way that told me I had hit the spot I was aiming for. He said he had a showing to get to, and we hung up, like two people who had failed to convince reality to change its mind. After lunch, I took a broom to the mudroom because it was the kind of chore you can do while thinking about other stuff. There's a high shelf in there where we keep picnic blankets and the old tackle box with lures that are too pretty to ever use. When Clara showed me where she'd put them, she'd said, "Some things are supposed to be pretty and useless, Klaus. Just let them be." We rarely argued about things like that, but I never liked useless stuff in the garage. I like my tools to work, even if I don't use them much. I brought the step stool in and climbed up to wipe the dust off the blankets. A small landslide of paper fell off the top of the shelf and slid across the floor. Take-out menus, a faded postcard from a cousin in Arizona, for coupons from a grocery store that's gone now, and a narrow blue envelope that slid further than the rest and ended up against the baseboard. For a good 15 seconds, I just froze. Not because I thought the envelope had some kind of magic to it, but because I wanted to watch that moment before I had to give it a name. The envelope had no return address. It was thick enough that it didn't want to bend, and paper that doesn't bend usually holds a truth someone wanted to last. There was one line on the front in Clara's neat, careful handwriting, "For Klaus." And below that, "Open when you know why." I knelt there on the mudroom tiles, my knees telling me about every year they've put in for me, and I let out a quiet little laugh, like a cough. Open when you know why. You can take that sentence a dozen different ways. Clara could put a whole world into 5 words and make me feel like I'd been given a treasure map and a challenge all at the same time. I didn't open it. I put the envelope on the kitchen table and stood over it like a man trying to decide whether to defuse a little bomb or invite it over for supper. The lake made its low winter noises outside the window. I brewed a second cup of coffee, which I almost never do, and didn't even drink it. The envelope just waited. I pressed my hand on it. It wasn't cold. I slid it under the legal pad and made a new list on a fresh spot on the page. Why would she make me wait? To keep me from acting out of anger. To keep me from acting out of fear. To make me notice what matters before I find out what's changed. I wrote "notice" and underlined it twice. The pencil left a little bump in the paper that you could feel if you ran your finger over it. I say things like this to my granddaughter Lise when she thinks I'm just telling her old man stories. Notice things, I tell her, and she rolls her eyes, but then she notices anyway. I left the envelope right there and went for a walk down to the dock. The snow had a thin crust on it, and every step I took broke through with a sound like a tiny apology. At the end of the path, the dock boards were covered in ice. In the summer, this is where Clara would sit with her feet in the water and read. She'd pretend to read the same paragraph for a whole hour just so she could watch dragonflies land on her toes. I stood there for a while and let the cold do its work, the way it gets into you until you feel sharp, like a piece of glass. I said out loud to no one, "I know why," and it caught me off guard because I did. Back at the house, I took the envelope and, without opening it, carried it into Clara's little office, the one she'd painted a light blue she joked was called "Better Decisions." The room smells like pencils and lemon oil. Her desk is wide and shallow, with a drawer on the right side that sticks in the winter. She kept a jar of beach glass on the corner because she liked the idea that the ocean could turn garbage into something you'd put on a windowsill. I sat in her chair and waited until the chair knew my weight again. Then I slid the envelope into the middle of the desk pad and looked around the room like the room was looking back at me. Her calendar was still on the wall, March, staring at me with its grid of days, like a field that had been plowed but not planted. She had written small notes in the squares even after the doctor's news, even after her body started breaking its own rules. "Call Annalise," one square said, with a little wavy line next to it. "Check taxes in another." There was a sticky note on the lamp. "Change bulb. Too yellow." The woman liked honest light. It takes a certain kind of guts to demand brightness when everything inside you wants to fade away. I didn't touch any of it. I left the envelope there like it was a guest book you sign later. That evening, the road plows scraped by and left that line of gray snow at the end of the driveway that I'd always hated and always shoveled. I put on Clara's old knit hat that she used to say made me look like a fisherman and went out with the shovel. It felt good to move something that was fighting back. Each time I lifted, a neat rectangle of clean edges grew. A car came by and slowed. Frida, my next-door neighbor, is the kind of woman who's baked more pies than some bakeries have. She rolled her window down and leaned out. "Klaus, honey, get back inside," she said. "You're making the rest of us look bad." She smiled and then got serious. "You need anything, you call me." I mean it. I told her I would. She's been saying the same thing for 30 years. I've needed salt and a ladder and a hammer, and once I needed a prayer, and she gave me all four. I slept in our bed again and had a dream about a lemon. Not a tree, not a branch. Just a single lemon rolling under my hand on a table somewhere that smelled like salt and clean air. On Sunday, Gretchen showed up without calling first. She does that. It's a habit she shares with the weather. She came in, knocking as she opened the door. "Dad, it's me." And she put her sunglasses on the console table like a flag planted in a war zone. She looked neat in a way that costs money. A navy jacket, a silk scarf, boots with not a single mark on them. When Gretchen was a little girl, she used to sit on the back steps and draw the house from all different angles, then bring the drawings inside and ask which one we should frame. "You can't frame a house you live in," I told her once. "It's supposed to change." She didn't like that answer. "Coffee?" I asked. "I'm good," she said, and sat down at the kitchen table, crossing one leg over the other, like a crane getting ready to land. Her eyes were moving all over the room like she was at an open house, looking for the little flaws buyers will put up with. "How are you?" I've never liked that word. Really? It holds a simple answer hostage. "I'm okay," I said. "Some hours are just longer than others." She nodded like she could put that line in a press release. Then she lifted her chin, the way you do when you're changing the subject. "Hans says you're putting up a fight." "I am," I said. "To what end?" she asked. Not mean, not even impatient. She genuinely wanted to hear my big point. "To the end where I get to live in my own home," I said. "And nobody puts it up for sale without me." She leaned forward, her hands on her knees. "Dad, the last time I was here, that side door latch was stuck." The stairs groaned like they were auditioning for a horror movie. "The dock, Dad. The dock is a lawsuit waiting to happen. What if you fall? What if you slip on the ice? There's work everywhere you look." I could have told her there are different kinds of work. The kind that changes a man's whole self and the kind that's just moving snow from one spot to another. I could have told her that fear is a terrible architect. Instead, I just asked, "Do you remember how to play the first song you learned on the piano?" She blinked at me. "What does that have to do with anything?" I said, "You never finished learning to play it." She sighed. "No, because you never finished learning to play. You learned how to start and then you got busy," I said. She looked at me for a long time, in a way that told me she had put her weapon down. "Are you calling me a quitter?" "No," I said. "I'm calling you my daughter." She gave a laugh, a brittle sound that I still love because I remember what her laugh sounded like before the world told her to put on her armor. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lake. "Hans isn't wrong about the market," she said. We could get you a number you'd be proud of. I'm not interested in numbers I'd be proud of, I said. I'm interested in a life I know. She turned back, her hands in her coat pockets. Then promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll tell me if you need help. I will, I said, which was both the truth and a lot more complicated than she thought. She kissed me on the cheek. The smell of her perfume followed her to the door and lingered for a minute after she closed it. When she was gone, I went to Clara's office and stood in the doorway like it was the entrance to some sensible land. The envelope was sitting on the desk pad, just waiting for me. I still didn't know if it held instructions, some big reveal, or both. I just knew Clara wouldn't have given me a command she didn't think I could handle. Open when you know why. I ran a finger along the top edge of the envelope and felt the seam give a little, then stop. Not yet. That afternoon, Lise called from school. She's got that thing Clara had, where she lands on a sentence like a bird on a fence, lightly, ready to take off if she needs to. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Here it is," I said. And the sigh of relief she let out told me how often we mistake hearing someone for really listening to them. She told me about a critique she had, how her professor said her arches were too polite and her curves needed to stop saying they were sorry. "Can curves apologize?" she asked me, laughing into the phone. "They can," I said. "Most of the good things in this world spend the first part of their lives apologizing." "Mom and Uncle Hans being intense?" she asked. Not in a gossipy way, but like she was asking if the weather was going to change and if she should grab an umbrella. "A little," I said. "Intense is the modern word for control," she hummed. "You okay up there?" "I am," I said. "And I'm thinking." "Oh," she said. "That's when things get good." "Lise," I said, "if I tell you something later, something you'll have to keep quiet about for a while, do you think you can do that?" "I can," she said, sounding serious all of a sudden. "I'll guard it like it's the last warm thing in winter." We talked about nothing and everything for another 15 minutes. The cafeteria soup that tried to be chowder and failed, the way the snow piles in Vermont look like strip malls by March, and her roommate who loves plants more than people but might be right about both. After we hung up, I sat for a long time without moving, my hand on the envelope like it was a stethoscope and the house was telling me if it still had a heartbeat. As it got dark, I walked the edge of the property, the way a man walks a fence looking for a break. The birch trees had that pale stubbornness they get in late winter, their bark peeling back like paper excuses. On the east side of the lot, near the stone wall that pretends it will always stand, I found the small mark Clara had cut into the bark of a sugar maple the year we argued about whether to tap our own sap or just buy syrup like normal people. The mark had widened with the tree, a soft V shape. She had told me then, if we ever get lost up here, look for the V. We used to build our maps out of silly stuff. Maybe that's what a marriage is, a set of directions for a place no one else has to understand. The moon came up, thin and unsure. I went inside and turned on the lamp in Clara's office, the one that was too yellow. The light made the envelope look warmer than it was. I pulled out her desk chair. Something was stuck. I reached under the chair and felt a little stone. Not a stone, a button. One of Clara's. Small, made of mother of pearl, a little scraped on the side. It must have fallen who knows when and ridden under this chair for who knows how long. I held it in my palm like a coin that had been put to work and then retired with honors. Time, like grief, is a lousy mathematician. It stretches and stutters and goes backward. I don't know how long I sat in that chair, watching an envelope that wasn't moving. Long enough for the house to understand that I wasn't going to give in to the part of me that likes all the answers right now. When I finally got up, I did it slowly, not because I'm fragile, but because the act of standing up deserves some respect. I slid the envelope back under the legal pad and wrote at the top of a new page, rules. Then I numbered them. Do not act out of panic. Do not explain things to people who haven't asked a real question. Write everything down that needs to be heavy. Find out what Clara meant before I let anyone else tell me what she meant. Keep the house warm. That last one made me chuckle. It seemed kind of stupid and mushy. But houses die in the cold. They warp and get mad and punish you with bad pipes. Keeping a house warm is a way of saying you still belong to someone. Maybe that someone was me. Maybe it was Clara. Maybe it was the promise we made to keep each other's names in our mouths as long as we could say them. The next morning, I called the chimney sweep. "Klaus," he said. "Haven't seen you since the fall. People who work with fire like to be remembered." He promised he'd come on Thursday. I called the plow guy and told him I'd shovel the ridge myself until the end of the month. "Suit yourself," he said, "and then, your back's gonna send you a bill by lunchtime." An email from Hans. It had a letter of intent attached. Cash offer. Good terms. No problems. You'll be free of responsibility. The words, "free of responsibility," floated on the screen like balloons that are never gonna pop. I forwarded the file to myself and closed the laptop. The kitchen clock ticked its broken seconds. I wrote a new line under Rule 6. Be boring on paper. Be decisive in person. I made a sandwich. It tasted like cardboard and doing your duty. I ate it anyway because guys like me don't skip meals as a strategy. The phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't saved. "This is Annalise. Call me when you're ready." A little wave emoji. I stared at the name and the little wave. Clara's March calendar. Call Annalise. A wave drawn next to it. Better decisions. I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I pulled down the tin box from the pantry shelf, the one that said cookies in cheerful writing that had been lying for 10 years. Inside were rubber bands, a tiny screwdriver, a spare key for the shed, and a Polaroid of Clara at 26 on a beach I didn't recognize. Her hair was wild from the wind, her eyes were shut against the sun, and her mouth was open, right in the middle of a laugh. On the back, in her neat handwriting, "We don't have to deserve joy to accept it." Under that, a small letter A. The letter looked like it had been added later with a darker pen. Annalise maybe. I put the photo in my shirt pocket and left the tin on the counter like a little evidence locker. The day crept toward evening. The old maple by the road threw a long shadow through the front room, across the rug we bought with our first tax refund, back when buying rugs felt like a huge, grown-up thing. I turned on the lamp in the corner, and it took a second to wake up. I've always liked that moment, the little bit of time it takes for a light bulb to give in to what it's made to do. I thought again about Hans's phrase, "free of responsibility." Some offers are insults that pretend to be favors. I am not free from this place. I don't want to be. If I leave someday, it'll be because I'm heading towards something, not because I lost an argument about square footage. After dinner, half a bowl of soup that tasted like water trying to be polite, I washed the pot and put it on the rack to dry. The sound of a pot dripping is a comfort I've never been able to explain. It tells me work has been done, heat has been applied, and relief is on its way. I wiped the table because Clara would have wanted it wiped. Then I went to the office, sat down, and put the envelope in the middle of the desk pad. I took a breath. And another. When you work on bridges for as long as I did, you learn that some bridges aren't finished until someone is brave enough to cross them. I slid my finger under the flap and felt the paper give. Just a little. Enough to let the air in, not enough to show me what was inside. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I've been scared before, on scaffolding in the wind that made promises, and in hospital rooms where machines tried to bargain. This wasn't fear. It was something cleaner. It was anticipation with integrity. I took my hand away and closed the flap again. "Not tonight," I said. I wrote one more line under Rule 7. Choose the hour, or the hour chooses you. Then I turned off the yellow lamp that Clara hated and went to bed. The lemon from my dream rolled once across my palm in the dark, and I could hear the lake trying to remember how to be water again. In the morning, when the light has the decency to be honest, I will open the envelope, but not because anyone told me to. Because I know why. Because I'm not interested in being handled anymore. Because the house is still warm. And because whatever is written in my wife's neat handwriting won't do the work for me. It'll only show me where to start. The next morning, the light came through the kitchen window in a way that made the dust in the air look like it had something to say. I poured coffee and just stood there, not drinking it, letting the steam curl up against my face. Clara used to tell me that mornings were the most honest version of a person. No one's watching yet, no changes made for other people's benefit, just your unedited self standing barefoot on a cold floor. I glanced toward the blue envelope still sitting in the middle of her desk in the office. I hadn't touched it since I put it there, but its presence was louder than any clock in the house. I told myself I'd open it later, maybe after lunch, maybe when the place felt more neutral, if that's even possible anymore. The thing about living with a woman like Clara for 54 years is that you get used to her leaving little clues. You don't even notice until way later. She didn't write, "Remember to check the drawer in the winter," or "Look in the shed after the first snow." She liked clues that didn't look like clues until you realized she'd been talking in code for months, sometimes years. She had faith in my patience. Or maybe she had faith that my stubbornness could be turned into persistence. After breakfast, I went into her office, not to open the envelope, but to sit in her chair and breathe in the air of someone who understood me better than I probably deserved. The pale blue walls she had named "Better Decisions" had faded a bit near the window. The sun's way of reminding you it keeps its records. On the desk were the neat piles she always had, bills here, letters there, and personal stuff in a small wooden box that had once held tea. I opened the box. Inside was a mix of practical and personal things, in that way Clara always seemed to mix them up. A packet of stamps, 3 sticks of sealing wax, a faded photo of Lise when she was 7, holding a crooked snowman, and at the bottom, a brass key on a red ribbon. I didn't know what the key was for. It was too small for the shed, too fancy for anything modern in this house. Tied to the ribbon was a tag. For the day you need a door no one else can find. I leaned back in the chair, the key warm from my hand. My mind moved through the house like water through pipes, searching, making a map. There were only so many doors here. Unless Clara wasn't talking about this house at all. Madeira came to mind, although I'd never been there. She'd mentioned it once years ago, in a way that made me think it was just another dream on her long list of places for another life. I'd brushed it off at the time, too busy with work deadlines and local obligations. Now the thought stayed in the room like an uninvited but necessary guest. I put the key back in the box and closed it, sliding it toward the back of the desk. Some things are meant to be kept close until you're ready to be changed by them. Around 10, the phone rang. I checked the caller ID. Oscar Becker, my old lawyer. His voice was the same, steady, with that slightly amused undertone of a guy who's seen people mess up their lives in 100 different ways. "Klaus," he said, "I hear from a little bird that your son's been trying to put your lake house on the market." "More than float," I said. "He's trying to sail it right out from under me." Oscar chuckled. "They forget you have my number." "They forget a lot of things," I said. "Good. That means we can use what they think they know to our advantage. I'll write up a notice. Something solid enough to scare off any of those easy buyers Hans might find." "I appreciate it," I said. "I'm not ready for a fight, but I'm not giving up the fort either." "You never were," Oscar said. "I'll email you the draft today." When I hung up, I felt a small jolt of control come back into the room. Not a win, just the feeling that the ground under my feet was mine again. I spent the next hour doing what Clara used to call reclaiming the perimeter. It's a habit from my engineering days, walking the edges of a site to understand the lay of the land before you decide what to build. I started in the living room, checking the windows, straightening a stack of old magazines Clara kept for the maps inside. In the hallway, I passed the wedding photo we'd never bothered to put in a proper frame, still just clipped into the cardboard folder from the photographer. Clara had liked it that way, like it wasn't finished yet. By the time I got to the back bedroom, I realized I was following her presence more than I was inspecting the house. Every drawer, every shelf had her handwriting somewhere on it. Labels, notes, little reminders in the margins of old receipts. That's when I saw it, in the corner of the closet, under an old wool blanket, a dark blue shoebox. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed. Inside were postcards, dozens of them, all from Madeira. Some were addressed to her, some were blank. The ones addressed to her were from Anneliese Dwart. The handwriting was loose and confident. Most had no date, just short notes like, "The sea is calm today. Wish you were here." Or, "Found a place you'd love. All wood and light." At the bottom of the stack was one addressed to both of us but never sent. It read, "For the day you're ready to see what we've been building for you." I leaned back, the shoebox in my lap. This was no casual vacation friend. Anneliese was a thread in a tapestry Clara had been weaving without telling me. Not because she was being mean, but because it was part of a plan. I put the shoebox on the bed and went to the office for the envelope. The two things, the envelope and the shoebox, felt like pieces of the same puzzle, but I wasn't ready to put them together yet. Not until I understood all the edges. Around noon, I made a sandwich and ate it standing up in the kitchen. That's when the phone buzzed. A text from Gretchen. "Basement's ready anytime you are. Just thinking about you." I stared at the message for a while before typing back, "Thanks. I'm good here for now." No reply. The silence was its own kind of pressure. In the afternoon, I called Lise. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright but sounding a little tired. "Hey, Grandpa, you sound like you're thinking about something that's gonna cause trouble." "Trouble for who?" I asked her back. "Depends," she said. "Is this about Mom and Uncle Hans in some way?" "It is," I told her, "but it's also about your grandmother and a place called Madeira." She let out a soft laugh. "Isn't that in Portugal?" "It sounds warm." "It is," I said. "And it's where your grandmother left a piece of our story." I didn't give her anything more than that, just enough to get her thinking. If there's one thing Clara taught me, it's that the right timing is everything when you want someone to remember. By late afternoon, the sky had gone that kind of gray that just wipes out the horizon. The lake and the air became one cold, endless surface. I sat by the window, the blue envelope in my hand and the shoebox on the table next to me. I thought about Clara walking into a post office somewhere in Madeira, buying postcards she knew I wouldn't see for years, about her hiding a brass key and trusting I'd only find it when I was ready to handle what it could unlock. That night, as I turned off the lights, I stopped in the doorway of the office. The envelope and the shoebox were still there, waiting. I realized then that whatever little game my children thought they were playing with the lake house, they were just amateurs compared to Clara. And I was finally ready to learn the rest of the rules. The envelope had been sitting on Clara's desk for almost a full 2 weeks, patient in a way only stuff that can't move can be. I'd walked by it a dozen times, letting my fingertips brush against its smooth, dark blue surface, telling myself, not yet. But that morning, I woke up with a different feeling in my chest. It wasn't grief, not really. Grief had its own feel, heavier and not up for discussion. This was something sharper. It felt like a mission. I made my coffee black and carried it into the office. The light was thin through the frosted glass of the window, gathering on the desk like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I sat down, reached for the envelope, and slid my thumb under the flap. Inside were 3 things, a folded letter in Clara's handwriting, a thin stack of legal papers, and a small slip of paper with a bunch of numbers that looked like an account code. I went for the letter first. "Klaus," it said. "If you're reading this, it means I'm not here to say things out loud anymore. You've always been solid, even when the ground under you wasn't. I've put something away somewhere they can't touch. Not because I ever thought you'd lose this house, but because I knew the day might come when the people you love forget what you've given them. The house in Madeira is in your name only. Annalise knows all the details. Keep it quiet until you've figured out how you want to use it. As for the bonds, they're in a separate account. The numbers on the slip will get you in. You'll know what to do with them when the time is right. When they start talking to you like you're a problem to be solved, remember this: you are not a problem. You are the foundation they've been standing on their whole lives. And foundations don't beg to be kept. They decide what gets to stay. I read it twice, my eyes stopping at that last line. Foundations don't beg. That was Clara through and through. Strong, not mean. Thoughtful, not dramatic. The legal papers were simple. A deed for the Madeira property notarized 5 years ago, a summary of some municipal bonds worth more than I would have guessed, and a letter from a Portuguese notary confirming that the property was in my name alone. No mention of any of this in any of the joint documents Hans or Gretchen might ever get their hands on. Clara had hidden this part of our life in plain sight just by never talking about it in the rooms where they were. I closed the envelope and slid it back into the desk drawer, and I locked it. That's when I grabbed the phone and called Oscar Becker. He answered on the first ring. I was just thinking about you, he said. Hope it was the kind of thinking that makes lawyers smile, I replied. It was the kind that makes them write letters before breakfast. I've got something for Hans's buyer if he's real, and for any agent nosing around. I told him about the envelope, not about the bonds or the house in Portugal, but about the idea behind them. The fact that Clara had seen all this coming. I don't want them thinking they can make a move on this property without me noticing, I said. I want them to know I'm paying attention. Oscar was quiet for a second. We can send a cease and desist to anyone who's been approached. It won't just slow them down, it'll make them have second thoughts. Nobody likes a deal that's under a cloud. Make it official, I said. And Oscar, yes. Send a copy to Hans and Gretchen. He let out a low whistle. That's gonna get you some phone calls. I'm counting on it. The letter went out that afternoon. By the next morning, Hans's name was flashing on my phone. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Dad, what in the world are you doing? His voice was tight, more insulted than concerned. Protecting my property, I said calmly. You're making this difficult for no reason. I've got a serious buyer. Cash offer. Your buyer's problem, I said, is that the seller isn't selling. Silence. You can't live out there forever, Dad. The winters. I've made it through 78 of them. This one won't kill me. You're being stubborn. That's one way to look at it. What's the other way? That I'm the owner. And that ends this conversation. I could hear him sigh, a sharp sound through the phone. Fine, but don't expect me to come running when you need help. I'll be sure not to. We hung up. 10 minutes later, Gretchen called. Her tone was a little lighter, but I could hear the same frustration underneath it. Dad, I heard Hans is upset. What's going on? You tell me, I said. I just think it's time you had less to deal with. That house is a lot of work. It's work I choose. I'm only saying. I know what you're saying, Gretchen. I'm just telling you I'm not interested. She sighed. You've always been like this, holding on to things. Some things are worth holding on to. There was a pause. Then she changed her approach. Well, my offer still stands. The basement's yours whenever you're ready. I'll keep that in mind, I said, and hung up. After those calls, the house felt different. Not heavier, but sharper, like all the edges that had been sanded down over the years were showing again. I spent the afternoon writing a letter of my own, one that wasn't for Hans or Gretchen. It was for Lise. I told her the lake house was staying in the family, but not in the way her mother or uncle imagined. I didn't mention Madeira yet, just that her grandmother had left something special, and that one day she and I would take a trip together to see it. I mailed it the same day, a seed planted in a quieter garden. That night, I sat by the fire with Clara's letter again. The firelight caught the curves of her handwriting, the way she always slanted her ease. I could hear her voice in the pauses, the way she stressed certain words. She'd written it for a moment when I might feel trapped, and reading it now, I realized she'd given me more than directions. She'd given me permission. Permission to play the long game. 2 days later, Oscar called again. "You'll be happy to know the serious buyer has backed out." Didn't like the uncertainty. I smiled into the phone. "One down." "And Hans?" Oscar asked. "He'll get mad." "That's fine. Mad people show their real colors." "You've got something planned," he said. "I've got time," I replied. I started making small changes after that. Little ways of strengthening my position. I called the county clerk to make sure all the property tax records were up to date. I went over the insurance policy. I checked the locks and replaced the 2 oldest ones. Not because I thought Hans and Gretchen would actually break in. They wouldn't go that low. But I'd learned over the years that the best defense is to leave no cracks for water to get in. Not real water, and not the other kind either. One evening, I took the brass key from the tea box in Clara's desk, held it in my hand, and felt its weight. It was the size of possibility, small enough to lose, big enough to change everything. I thought about calling Annalise right then, but I decided against it. Not yet. Let the currents in Boston and New York churn for a little longer. Let Hans and Gretchen think they'd hit a wall they couldn't climb. Because what they didn't know was that the wall was just the first part of the structure. Behind it, there was a whole new place they couldn't even see. By the end of the week, I had the legal side all buttoned up. The lake house wasn't going anywhere without my signature, and my signature wasn't going anywhere without my permission. But I knew this was just the first move. Hans's ambition wasn't the kind that gives up after one blocked shot. And Gretchen's persistence, quieter but just as strong, would find other ways to try to talk me into it. That was fine. Let them come. I'd built bridges in storms before. I knew how to hold a line until the other side ran out of rope. I stood at the window that night, looking out at the ice stretching across the lake. Somewhere under that frozen surface, water was still moving. Quiet, patient, waiting for the right season to break through. So was I. The sky the next morning was the color of a bruise that had decided not to tell anyone how it got there. March does that here, light that looks like it's recovering from something. I stood in the doorway of the hall closet with a pad of sticky notes and a black marker and told myself this wasn't about being petty. Petty is loud. This would be quiet, clear. The closet still called itself a linen closet, even though it had been a museum for 5 years. The shelves were stacked with the soft evidence of a family that used to fill every room at once. Clara's quilts, the good guest sheets with the tiny blue flowers she pretended to hate. A box labeled, camping, that hadn't left the house since Lise was 10 and thought she could become friends with a raccoon. On the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of beach towels, was a shoebox with masking tape on it in my block handwriting from a different time. Hans, school. I set it on the hall runner and kept going. Gretchen's stuff had a way of pretending it was part of the house. A hat box her freshman roommate called aspirational, a portfolio case with a broken zipper. A small wooden crate with the words, Gretchen's room, stenciled on it in a child's hand that I recognized as my own from a summer when neat labels felt like love. Above the crate, a flat box held the yellowed sheet music for Für Elise. I could hear the first 8 bars in the bones of the house. I brought everything to the dining table and built 2 islands. Hans's stuff on the left, Gretchen's on the right. The table is heavy oak. We bought it the year Hans refused to eat anything that wasn't the color of a football. I ran my hand along the edge and found a little dent where a moving guy had knocked it against the door frame in '98 and apologized like he'd insulted a person. Clara had said, "Don't worry. That's how it learns our story." I opened Hans's box first. The smell rose up, paper dust, a hint of whatever they put in trophy cases to make your past feel like a museum. On top, a stack of baseball cards he'd once sworn would pay for his future. Horst Meyer, Fritz Muller, and a rookie card in a plastic sleeve he'd guarded like a holy relic. Underneath that, a leather belt from his first suit, the one we bought off the rack when he thought a jacket could take the place of patience. A photo of him at 16 with a bat that was too heavy for his wrists and that half-wild grin boys wear when they think they've already become men just by wanting to. I put the cards to one side, the belt to the other, and kept digging. His high school diploma, the tassel and all, in a plastic sandwich bag. I remember the day, June, hot, speeches about a wide-open future. Hans's name was mispronounced by a vice principal who never learned anyone's names right unless their parents were on the school board. I took a sticky note and wrote in my neat printing, "Yours, keep it." I stuck it to the corner of the diploma. Next, a little tin. I opened it and laughed. Baby teeth. We'd told him the tooth fairy kept records and we had to give the teeth to her to get the dollar. He believed us until he was 12 and too proud to ask questions. I held one up and felt both ridiculous and sacred. How does a man hold a piece of what used to connect him to a boy? I closed the tin and put it back. At the very bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was the leather jacket I'd given him when he turned 19. He'd looked in the mirror and tilted his chin like a man auditioning for the part of someone who doesn't need advice. The jacket smelled faintly of aftershave and old dreams. I slipped my hand into the pocket and found a folded bar napkin with a phone number and a name I didn't know. Time has a sense of humor. Gretchen's stack was quieter. Her sketchbook's elastic band was worn out, and there was a smudge of graphite from her thumbprint on the cover. I paged through it, the house from 3 different angles, Clara in profile sitting on the back steps reading, Hans's truck the week he got it and loved it. The lake in November as a simple line. Her piano books had pencil notes, "Slow down here, don't rush," and a small heart next to a line of music she once told me felt like remembering someone. I lifted the scarf Clara had knitted for her in a shade of blue they'd argued about for a whole Saturday. "Gretchen, this isn't my color," she'd said. Clara answered, "It will be." And later, when the winter light hit her daughter's face just right, it was. I wrote a note for Gretchen, too, on the top page of her oldest sketchbook. "What you finish is yours. What you leave here isn't." I didn't mean it as a lecture. I meant it as a boundary, which is a kinder kind of sentence than you think if you say it with love. When the piles were done, I went to the garage to find clean boxes. The garage is a machine all its own. Every tool on its hook, the broom hanging high, a coil of orange extension cord wrapped with the care you give a snake you trust. I brought 3 medium-sized boxes into the house and lined them with old newspapers I'd saved because I never learned how to throw out a headline. I packed Hans's things carefully, the cards face up as if they needed air. The diploma on top, the jacket folded like a story that isn't over yet. For Gretchen's box, I put the sketchbooks first, then the hat box with nothing useful in it except the memory of her posing, asking if the angle looked right. The piano book stacked in order of her ambition, the smallest on top. I labeled each box with a black marker in block letters. Hans, personal, return. And Gretchen, personal, return. I wrote fragile in the corner because memory breaks if you throw it too hard. When you're a man my age, people will say you're doing something for the drama of it. What I was doing was making a delivery. Points of view argue. Deliveries make things clear. I called a local courier service, not some big company with a tracking app that sends you confetti when your package moves 2 counties over. A 3-truck operation run by a man named Schmidt who looks like the good part of a day's work. He answered on the second ring. "Schmidt," I said, "this is Klaus Fischer out on Miller Point." I know the house, he said. You need a pickup. 2 boxes for my son in Boston. 1 for my daughter in Manhattan. Delivered to their doors. Pictures as proof. Get a signature. If they won't sign, take a picture of the box on the doorstep. He let out a low whistle. Complicated family. Just precise instructions, I said. We can do tomorrow morning, 7 to 9. 7, I said. Let the timing do some of the talking. He laughed once. I like it when the boxes get to deliver a message. Me too, I said. After I hung up, I wrote 2 letters on plain white paper, no emails. Ink has a temperature that pixels can't hold. Hans. I'm sending back what belongs to you. I'm keeping what belongs to me. If you have any questions about the difference, you'll need to learn how to ask the right ones. Your father. Here's the final part of the story, translated and rewritten as requested. The revised story. Megan. What you finish, you keep with you. I'm done holding on to all your beginnings. If you want this house to have you again, you'll have to come as a guest. Your father. I slid Hans's note into the collar of his leather jacket so his fingers would find it right where his ego used to be. I put Gretchen's note under the top flap of her oldest sketchbook, where the page still had the mark of a pencil that believed in lines before words. Evening made its way through the house. The light became this low, golden color that made everything look like it had a secret it wanted to tell me. I put the boxes by the door and stuck a note on the knob. Lock back door. Turn on hot water. Keys for Schmidt. Clara used to tease me about my notes. You're making a museum tour out of a day, she'd say. Maybe. But museums are there to protect things from people who might not know how to handle them. I didn't sleep well. Not because I was nervous, but because I was excited. The kind of feeling that lives in your legs, like they want the morning to hurry up and get here. At 6:51, I turned on the porch light. At 6:59, I heard the rumble of a truck that told me its steering was honest. Schmidt got out, his hat pulled low against the wind, with 2 younger guys behind him, pushing dollies that had seen worse winters than this one. Mr. Fisher, he said, holding out his hand. We're your couriers. I appreciate it, I said. Boston first, Manhattan second. He looked at the boxes. Names are clear. You want them to sign if they'll do it. Photos either way. He nodded. You want them to know who it's from? Yes. In my handwriting, I said. Let that do a little of the work for me. They move like people who know how to carry other people's stuff without taking on any of the feelings that go with it. At the door, I gave Schmidt 2 envelopes with the addresses and my number. If they ask questions, I said, don't answer. You're making a delivery, not starting a debate. He smiled. That's my favorite part. At 7:23, the truck door thumped shut. Schmidt tipped his cap. We'll be gentle. He paused, then added, and respectful. Respect buys more than people think, I said. When the truck pulled out toward town, the house seemed to breathe in. It's amazing how quiet can change its shape. Last night's quiet was a holding pattern. This morning's was a blank page. I made coffee and, this time, I didn't forget to drink it. While the mug was still warm, I wrote a new line on my rules page. Number 8, give back what's theirs before they try to take what's yours. At 9:07, my phone buzzed. A photo from a number I didn't know, timestamped 7:58 a.m., Boston. Hans's front steps, the brick looking perfect, a doormat that said, hello, like a command. The box was on the top step, my handwriting plain to see, Hans, personal, return. In the corner of the picture, you could see the sleeve of a man's coat and a hand reaching down to pick it up. No caption. The second photo arrived 31 minutes later. 8:29 a.m., Manhattan. A narrow hallway with black and white tiles. Gretchen's door was propped open with a shoe. The box was leaning against it. You could just see the corner of her umbrella stand. The photo was angled so the word "return" looked like a headline. I sent back a single word to the courier, "Received." At 10:13, Hans called. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. "What is this?" His voice was tight, but out of breath, like he'd run to catch up to something that was already gone. "A delivery," I said. "You sent me, what?" "My childhood, my old stuff to my house, your belongings." "This is a stupid game," he said. "This is a statement of fact. You think you're making a point? I told you, deliveries make things clear. You had no right to go through my things." "I had every right to stop storing them," I said. "This house is not a warehouse for the people you used to be that couldn't take care of themselves." He blew air into the phone. "So what's next, Dad? You going to mail me the porch swing?" "The air?" he said. "You think this changes anything?" I think," I said, "that you're going to realize when a man stops holding on to your past, you can't use it to try to open his present." Silence. He hates silence when it's coming from someone else. "Don't send me anything else," he said finally. "Then don't leave anything else behind," I said, and hung up. At 11:02, Gretchen texted. "You okay?" A box showed up. "I wish you had told me." I didn't answer right away. I opened the back door and stood on the step, letting the cold bite my face in a way I appreciate. The lake surface had learned a new trick overnight. The top inch had turned glassy, reflecting a pale sun that had the decency to be there but not put on a show. The maple tree by the path clicked in the light wind, like someone counting coins in another room. The phone buzzed again. "Dad?" I typed, "I'm okay. Sending back what's yours." She called. I picked up. "Is this a message?" she asked. "Everything we send is a message," I said, "even when we call it mail." She made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been a defense. "You could have just asked me to pick it up." "I did," I said. "Many times, for years." Asking turned into storing. Storing turned into assuming. I'm stopping the math where it should have ended. I could hear her breath, careful, like she was telling it to behave. "There's a letter inside," she said quietly. "There is," I said. "What you finish is yours," she read. The word sounded different in her mouth. "You think I don't finish things? I think you start so many things so well that finishing feels like a betrayal." She was quiet for a long time. "That's almost nice," she said. "And it still hurts." "Maybe it should," I said gently. Pain is a teacher Clara trusted. She never liked him, but she trusted him. "I found the scarf," she said, changing the subject and not. "It's bluer than I remember." "She said it would be," I said. "Dad," she breathed, soft as a match being lit. "Are you leaving?" "Not the house," I said. "Not today." "That's not what I asked." "I know," I said. And for the first time in this whole long winter, I gave myself the kindness of not explaining everything I understood. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and laid my hands flat on the wood that had held 1,000 meals and 3 big decisions. I thought about Clara's letter. Foundations don't beg to be kept. This table was a foundation. The house was. The marriage was. The role I had agreed to play in our family, without even trying out for it, a supporting beam, an occasional wall during a storm, a quiet room at the end of the hall where common sense lived. At noon, Frida knocked with the back of her hand, the little tap she uses when she's not sure if she's interrupting. I opened the door. She was holding a pie tin under a towel. "Don't ask me what kind," she said. "I get offended when people try to guess." "Then I'll be thankful first and accurate later," I said, and she smiled. She looked past me at the empty space by the door where the boxes had been. Frida is the kind of person who sees everything and only tells you the part you're ready to hear. You cleared out some space, she said. I did. Feels good. Feels like folding a map along the right crease, I said. Good, she said. Maps that are packed wrong get torn. She put the pie down, and touched my arm. You call me if the map tries to fold you. After lunch, pecan, which I did guess and was allowed to, I walked through the rooms with a new perspective. It's amazing what not having things around does for the view. Without the boxes, the hallway looked taller. Without the crate marked Gretchen's room, the guest room felt less like a dusty museum and more like a bed that deserved to be slept in. I opened the windows for 10 minutes and let the air act the way it was made to. The house approved. Around 3, I went down to the basement. The sump pump gave a satisfied chug. On the shelf near the fuse box, I found the old Polaroid camera. I blew the dust off it and smiled at my silly self. No film. Next to it, a cigar box with Lee's written on it in a 13-year-old's sad handwriting. Inside was a collection that told a story, a feather, a foreign coin, a ticket stub from a local theater where she'd leaned her head on Clara's shoulder and whispered, "Do all stories end where they're supposed to?" I'd whispered back, "Only the ones that know their own stories." Underneath, a scribbled list titled Plans. Learn to build arches. Make a lemon pie like grandma. See a place where the water smells different. I put the list in my wallet. It felt like permission. At 4:37, a text from Schmidt. A picture of Hansa's signature on a delivery slip. His name big and impatient. Then another one. Gretchen's in neat handwriting, received by G. Carter. Under the second photo, Schmidt had typed done. Feels like the right kind of work. It was, I wrote back. At dusk, the phone rang. Hans again. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, let him show me who he wants to be today. You're serious about this? He said without a greeting. I am, I said. You think boxes change the fact that you can't take care of that place forever? Nothing changes the fact that time has its own calendar, I said. But I get to choose what fills the days. You're going to end up alone, he said, as if you were telling me the weather forecast. I've been alone, I said. The kind that has a person still in the room but gone anyway. This kind is cleaner. He didn't like that. So what's the next step? You disown us. Put the house in some trust no one can touch. Run off to Florida. Florida doesn't have the right water, I said, and he gave a small bark of a laugh despite himself. Look, he said, sounding tired now, like a man who'd run out of lines he'd practiced. I don't want to find out something happened to you because you were too proud to say you needed help. I'm not too proud, I said. I'm too old to confuse control with care. That sounds like something Mom would say, he muttered. It does, I said. You should listen to it. We didn't say goodbye so much as we put the phones down at the same time. I didn't take the call as him giving up. I took it as a man noticing he'd pushed against something that wouldn't move, and realizing that it didn't ruin his day. Night came without a fuss. I washed the dishes with the radio off. In the quiet, the thought came to me as simply as a street sign. I had been storing more than just boxes. I had been storing outcomes for my children, taking on all their unfinished business, holding their might-be's so they could travel light. Clara had let me do it because she understood love as a series of small pushes you apply where they matter most. But love has to grow up when you can't carry it the old way. I went to Clara's office and found the brass key again. I laid it on the desk pad next to the blue envelope and the shoebox of postcards. 3 objects, 1 story. I traced the edge of the key. I imagined a door somewhere that it fit, a lock that would know it, a house with white walls and light the color of lemons rolled under a hand. A woman named Annalise who knew how to tell the truth gently. On my rules page, I added a 9th line, number 9, return the weight you're not meant to carry, or it will decide for you what to drop. The next morning, I woke with a calmness that didn't need to prove itself. I shaved with the sandalwood soap Clara used to love, and for the first time since she died, the mirror didn't feel like an accusation. I made coffee, drank it while it was still hot, and walked to the window. The lake had a new crack down the middle where the ice was thinking about giving up being stubborn. A crow on the birch tree was announcing nothing in particular and seemed content. On the table, my phone buzzed. A photo from Gretchen. The scarf around her neck was blue and a little ridiculous and perfect. Her face was half in the frame, her eyes red in a way she hadn't edited. The caption, practicing. Then another message from a number with a country code I didn't know. This is Annalise. When you are ready to stop storing everyone else's winters, come see our spring. I smiled like a man who had been forgiven by a place. I wrote back, soon, but not before Sunday. Not before a pie with Lees that tastes like a decision. Not before one more walk of the perimeter with a pencil in my pocket to write down the things that needed to be done and the ones that didn't deserve to be called work anymore. At noon, I called Schmidt to thank him again. He said the kind of thing only men who move boxes for a living understand. When you send something to the right address, the house it leaves finally gets quiet. Mine did, I said. Good, he said. Then that was the point. After we hung up, I took out 2 sheets of paper and wrote the addresses I'd been avoiding writing down, Hans's and Gretchen's in my own hand, on a lined sheet I folded and slipped into the drawer labeled, important, with no other explanation. If someday someone needed to know where I decided to stop storing them, I wanted it on paper, in black ink, written by the man who finally learned to label the map correctly. Late afternoon, the sun found a way through the clouds like a tired parent making it to the school play for the last act. The kitchen was filled with a determined gold light. I put the kettle on, not for tea, just for the sound. I like water that remembers it has another form. I went to the office, sat down, and pulled the blue envelope, the shoebox, and the brass key into a neat line. Returning what's theirs, I said out loud, means going where mine is. I opened the shoebox and took out the postcard at the bottom again, the one addressed to both of us but never sent. For the day you're ready to see what we've been building for you. I turned it over. In tiny letters in the corner, a number, plus 351. A phone number. How many years had this been waiting? How many chances had I missed because I thought storing and taking care of something were the same job? I dialed. The ring sounded different, longer, as if it had to cross a room full of light to reach a person. A woman answered in a voice that held a smile even before the words. Senor Fischer. Klaus, I said. Ah, she said, and the syllable rolled like a small wave over stones. Then the map is right. We didn't talk for long. She didn't exaggerate about the sun. She didn't promise any answers. She just said, the house is ready to be useful. The door is where it was. The key in your hand will be recognized by the lock. Come when you want the air to stop apologizing for being cold. After I hung up, I put the key back down and realized my hands were steady. The kind of steady you get when you've given back what isn't yours and picked up what is. The kind of steady you build a bridge with. That evening, I lit the fire, sat in the chair that had learned me, and watched the flames do their straightforward work. In the quiet, I could almost hear Clara's voice, not as a memory, but as an instruction, there. Now you've made room for your life again. It was a Tuesday when they came. The kind of late winter Tuesday where the air outside is brittle enough to snap, but the lake still holds its ice like a stubborn secret. I'd been up since before dawn, listening to the slow groans of the house settling into its bones, running my hands along the window frames Clara used to insist we oil every spring. The fire was still a low orange knot in the hearth when the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway broke the quiet. Hans's truck, with its Boston plates, covered in salt from the highway, pulled in first. Gretchen's black SUV followed, just sitting behind him like a shadow that didn't want to commit. I stayed in my chair by the window and watched them in the glass reflection. Hans got out without a jacket, as if the cold might listen to his impatience. Gretchen's heels clicked against the patches of ice on the walkway. She was wearing the same camel-colored wool coat Clara once said made her look like someone who knew where the bodies were buried. They didn't knock right away. I could hear a muffled conversation, the up and down of voices trying to agree on who should talk first. Finally, Hans's fist hit the door, 3 hard knocks. Not the knock of a visitor, but the knock of someone who already thinks he owns the place. I took my time, slid the lock open, and opened the door, letting the wind cut between us before I said a word. "Dad," Hans began, his voice somewhere between professional and rehearsed. "We've come to talk." Gretchen interrupted him. She was holding a folder under her arm, the way people hold documents when they think paper can make them sound reasonable. I stepped aside and let them in. Not because they'd earned it, but because confrontations are best held on your home turf. The air between them and the fireplace seemed to shrink as they crossed the threshold. Hans got right to it. "We've brought a letter of intent from a very serious buyer. This isn't just some casual offer. It's solid cash, well above the market." The revised story. Gretchen slid the folder open and put a few papers on the coffee table between us. "It's from an investor out of Frankfurt," she said. "Wants the place for a vacation rental. Says he can close in 30 days. I didn't look at the papers. I looked at them. My son, with the posture of a real estate agent, shoulders forward, chin up, like he's trying to sell me my own floorboards. My daughter, with her public relations voice, all smooth and polite, her eyes darting around to see how I was taking it. Hans tapped the top sheet. "Dad, you have to understand, this is the best time to sell. You're sitting on a ton of equity. It could make things so much easier for you. Maintenance on a place like this. It's too much for one person. Asterisk asterisk and moving into Gretchen's basement apartment," she added, "would mean you're close to family. We could help, keep an eye on you." I leaned back in my chair, letting the warmth of the fire claim my side. Maintenance is under control. Taxes are paid. No mortgage to worry about. I don't need easier. I need what's mine. Hans's jaw twitched. "You're being stubborn." "Stubborn?" I repeated, tasting the word. "That's one way to say it. Another way is clear." Gretchen tried again, her voice softer. "Dad, it's not just about you. The value of this house, it's part of the family's future. You could give us more in cash than you can in an old property by a frozen lake." I let the silence hang there. The kind of silence Clara once said makes people fill it with things they didn't mean to say. And right on cue, Hans sighed. "Look," he said. "We've already spoken to a lawyer. There are ways, guardianship, joint ownership. That could make the sale happen, even if you're not on board." There it was. The sharp edge under all the politeness, the part they'd kept hidden until now. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You want to know the truth? I paid off this house 6 years ago. Every board, every nail, every shingle, bought and paid for without owing a single cent to anyone. And I'm not behind on a single bill. So whatever your lawyer told you about prying this place out of my hands, you can forget it." Gretchen's eyes flicked to Hans. He shrugged. The unspoken, "I told you so," passed between them like a private code. Hans's voice became sharp. "Dad, you're making this harder than it has to be. That's because you're trying to measure my life in square footage and market trends," I said. "And I measure it in winters I've survived, in summers on the porch, in the sound this dock makes when the ice breaks in April. You don't get to take that from me." The air in the room got tight. Outside, the wind slapped the lake's surface, sending a shiver through the ice. I stood up, not to scare them, but to end the conversation. "This house isn't for sale. Not to your investor, not to anyone you convinced to draw up paperwork. And if the next time you drive out here, it's only to talk about selling, don't bother getting out of the car. Hans started to speak, but I held up a hand. We're done for today. Gretchen gathered the papers slowly, as if she hoped the effort would change my mind. It didn't. Hans shoved his hands in his pockets, his jaw clenching like he was chewing on his last argument and couldn't swallow it. At the door, Gretchen stopped. You know, Dad, there's a difference between protecting what's yours and shutting people out. I looked past her, out at the frozen lake. There's also a difference between family visiting and family looting. Hans muttered something under his breath that I didn't bother asking him to repeat. They walked down the steps, their footsteps crunching against the gravel. The two cars reversed down the driveway, their taillights blinking like they were running away in the cold. I closed the door and leaned against it for a long minute, listening to the sudden lack of their voices. The house seemed to breathe again, the fire crackling as if to say, good riddance. On the kitchen counter sat Clara's navy blue envelope, still unopened since the night I found it. I traced its edge with my finger, thinking about how easily they assumed they could just strip this place down to a number on a page. How little they understood about what it means to keep something alive, not just in walls and beams, but in the weight it holds for the person who has lived it. I poured myself a coffee and stood by the window, watching the lake hold its frozen silence. Somewhere under that ice was the same water Clara and I had swum in every summer for 3 decades. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right season to show itself again. That's the thing about holding your ground. It isn't about digging in your heels until you're exhausted. It's about knowing which ground is worth holding on to and being willing to let the rest go. And this ground, the house, the lake, the quiet, wasn't going anywhere. Not while I was still here to keep the door closed. The confrontation. The town office still smells like varnish in the winter. It's the kind of place where decisions that change people's lives are made in rooms with old ceiling tiles and a flag stuck in the corner like patriotism is a piece of furniture. I got there 10 minutes early because showing up on time feels like letting other people's schedules control you. I like rooms to know I was there before anyone else knocked. Oscar Becker was already sitting at the far end of the long table, his pen lined up an inch from his yellow legal pad, the way men who read the fine print line up their days. He gave me a nod that said, "We are not here to put on a show." He slid a fresh copy of his letter over to my side. Notice of non-representation. No agent is authorized to list or sell my property. Any attempt to interfere with the quiet enjoyment of it will be treated as a violation. And a statement of my competence, which I had asked him to write in advance. It wasn't required. It was just an exclamation point. "You look ready," he said. "I'm tired of being talked about in rooms I'm not in," I said. "Today, I intend to be in the room." He smiled with his eyes, which is the only place worth smiling. The door opened at 9:01. Gretchen walked in first, a file folder clutched like a shield. Hans followed, his tie pulled too tight, the knot of a man who chokes his sentences before they can breathe. Behind them, a younger attorney with a haircut that believed in itself. He introduced himself smoothly. "Jens Kohler," he said to Oscar. Then to me, "Mr. Fischer." "Oscar Becker," Oscar replied, shaking hands lightly like he preferred ink on paper to oil on skin. We didn't make small talk. Small talk is a kind of cowardice in rooms where people plan to change your address. A clerk poked her head in to say we could use the conference room down the hall. I picked up the stack of notices and let everyone else carry their faith in getting what they want. The conference room had the same long table, the same chairs, with the same habit of squeaking only when the wrong person sat in them. We took our places. Hans and Gretchen, side by side like a brand campaign. Jens at their corner. Oscar to my left, one foot on the ground, the other ready to go. Jens started with the polished confidence of a man who had learned to sound like he cared without it affecting his billable hours. "We're here in good faith," he said, the phrase living in a nest of conditions, to talk about a way forward that protects Mr. Fisher's well-being while recognizing the realities of keeping up a property of this size. Oscar slid the notice of non-representation into the center of the table with a single finger. "We're here for clarity," he said. "My client owns his home outright. He is not listing it. He has not authorized anyone to look for buyers. Any further attempt to do so will be treated as a tort." Jens bowed his head a little as if it were required by good manners. "We acknowledge the notice," he said, "but we should also acknowledge the bigger picture. Mr. Fisher is 78. He's not a number," I said. Hans's jaw clicked. Gretchen's mouth softened and then tightened into a straight line. She looked at me the way people look at a door they keep assuming will open if they just keep talking to it. Jens kept going. "There have been private concerns that Mr. Fisher's ability to maintain the place and make complex decisions may be affected by his grief." Oscar didn't look up from his pad. "The word 'privately' is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence," he said. Jens held his hands out as if to show he wasn't hiding any knives. "We're simply exploring options, guardianship, or maybe a co-ownership agreement that would make sure the property doesn't become a burden." Oscar slid the second document out like a card dealer laying down a card you should have seen coming. "Statement of competency, signed by my personal doctor. Proof of my clean brain scans, good memory, clear thinking, and the fact that I can live on my own. Dates, numbers, all the boring proof. You'll find that burdens," Oscar said, "remain subjective until you meet objective standards. We meet them. Silence works harder under fluorescent lights. You could hear the hum above us and the scrape of a chair in a room down the hall." Jens read the statement like he thought the ink might confess. Hans's eyes bounced off the paper like it had burned him. Gretchen looked at me, then away, then back, as if she wanted to find a different movie playing on the wall behind my head. I reached for the third document and slid it toward Jens. "A cease and desist, with the names blacked out in this copy, the originals were with the county and with Oscar. Your serious buyer," I said to Hans, "will get his copy this afternoon." Jens glanced at Hans and then got his composure back. "We're not trying to fight Mr. Fisher," he said. "We're trying to plan." "I've been planning," I said, "for 54 years. That's what paying off a mortgage is. That's what fixing a dock is. That's what cutting a rosemary hedge is. It's planning to still be where you say you belong." Gretchen leaned forward. "Dad, we're not your enemies." "Then stop showing up with papers that treat me like a problem," I said, and let the sentence land with all its weight. Oscar folded his hands. "There is a second matter," he said calmly, looking down at his notes as if we were just going through an agenda. "Threats, however vague, about petitioning for guardianship. Those calls were recorded with notice under Vermont law. If such a petition is filed, we'll submit the recordings to prove not only his competence, but also attempted financial coercion. I'm sure your client understands how badly those tapes would look in front of a judge." Jens's mouth did a thing that professional mouths do when they wish they weren't attached to the person whose case they're arguing. "We're not here to threaten litigation," he said. "We're here to avoid it." "Then avoid it," Oscar said pleasantly. Hans put his hands on the table. "He can't keep living out there alone," he said, his voice getting thinner. "He's going to fall on the steps or forget the stove or—" "I changed the back door lock last week," I said. "Fixed the loose railing on the stairs. Had the chimney swept. Put new batteries in the smoke detectors. You want to know the brand?" I wrote it down. He looked at me like I had ruined a script he was counting on. "You're making this into a fight," he said. "It is a fight," I said. "When two people want different things and only one of them wants to use a judge to get it." He sat back slowly, his fighting stance turning into just a way of sitting. Gretchen's voice came out softer. "Dad," she said, and this time she let the word be a real word, not just a label. "What are you so afraid will happen if you just let us help?" I thought of the brass key on Clara's desk, the postcards of Madeira, the envelope with her neat handwriting telling me I was a foundation and not a project. I thought of the dock in April when the ice breaks, and if you listen, you can hear the lake groan as it returns to itself. Help, I said, is putting up bricks when a wall is falling. Help is soup when the fever won't go away. Help is showing up on a Sunday with a pie and just sitting without an agenda. Help is not a letter of intent slid across my table like a verdict. Gretchen swallowed. She looked down at her hands, then at the folder, then at Jens. Then she did something I didn't expect. She closed the folder. It was a small sound. It echoed. Jens cleared his throat, sensing his footing was changing. Perhaps we can think about a compromise, he said, pivoting like a man stepping to the other foot on a swaying ship deck. A timeline. If Mr. Fisher chooses to sell within, say, 9 months, he agrees to consult with his children. If not, we can reconsider. Oscar raised an eyebrow. Consult is a big word, he said. You could drive a moving truck through it. We're just trying to keep communication open, Jens said. Communication has been open, I said. You called to sell my house the week we buried my wife. That wasn't strictly true, but it was close enough to work as a boundary. The clerk opened the door a little and said we had 5 minutes left in the room. Time had done its fair thing again, giving us a portion and not caring about what we did with it. Oscar gathered his papers into a neat stack. Our position is simple, he said. The property is not for sale. Any attempt to list it or look for buyers will be met with action. If you file guardianship papers, we'll respond with evidence that will make you regret printing them. He looked at Jens the way good lawyers look at other good lawyers when they would rather not go to war. Don't let your clients make you do stupid work. Jens nodded once, a sign of surrender disguised as good manners. He closed his folder without the same finality Gretchen had. We'll advise them accordingly, he said. Hans stood up too fast, his chair complaining. He looked at me like a man who had lost an argument and therefore needed to win a feeling. This isn't over, he said, which is what men say when the law has just told them it is. It is for today, I said. We walked out into the hallway where framed photos of ribbon cuttings pretended to be history. At the door, Gretchen put her hand on my sleeve for a second. Pie on Sunday? She asked. It wasn't an apology. It was an invitation to stop counting. Yes, I said. 2 o'clock. If the conversation turns into square footage, you'll eat it on the porch. She smiled despite herself. Fair. Hans was staring past us at the parking lot. His mouth had found a straight line he used to practice in the mirror when he thought being serious could be worn like a cologne. I'll call you, he said, which I took as a promise he might keep to himself. Outside, the wind bit clean. We all did that little dance people do when the cold reminds them they have shoulders. Oscar squinted up at the winter sun like a man checking a straight line. You handled that, he said. I didn't yell, I said. That's most of handling it, he said. We shook hands, and I watched him walk to his car, the plain sedan of a man who has never needed to prove himself with chrome. Hans and Gretchen drove off in separate directions, as if a compass had finally admitted it had more than one answer. I stayed for a moment longer in the parking lot, the salt crunching under my boots. And then I drove home the long way. Past the church Frida goes to, past the post office where Clara insisted on buying stamps in person because machines don't need to know our business, past the elementary school where Lise once lost a mitten and found a friend. Back at the house, the light through the south window had settled into that steady afternoon square that makes everything look honest, whether it wants to or not. I hung my coat on the peg. The radiator clicked once, as if to confirm we had made it through the morning. I went to Clara's office and pulled out the drawer, the navy blue envelope, the brass key on its red ribbon, the shoebox of postcards that smelled faintly of salt and paper that had traveled farther than any speech. I set them on the desk pad in a line. I called Oscar and left a message. Thank you. Consider this part finished. Stand by for mail from Lisbon. Then I dialed a number I had written in small, careful numbers on the back of the last postcard. It rang longer than American phones ring, like the sound had to cross a wide room filled with white walls and bowls of lemons before it reached a person. When Annalise answered, her voice came as if it already knew mine. "Senor Fischer," she said. "Klaus," I said. "Call me Klaus." "Klaus," she repeated, and made the word sound less like a name and more like a place. "We're ready," I said. "The house here will hold for now." "The other house." I glanced at the key. "I think it's time to see it." "There will be clean sheets," she said, as if answers were best given in linen. "And a window you will open without thinking." "And the door?" "You have the key," she said. "I do." "Good," she said. "Then you will let yourself in." That is how a man becomes himself again in a foreign place. We agreed on nothing fancy, a date, a time, the advice of a person who has ferried other people's grief across a small stretch of sea and learned which currents are a lie. When we hung up, I stood in the middle of the office and let the house hear me say, "Soon." The revised story. On the kitchen table, I opened the legal pad to my rules and added a line, number 10, "If they try to move you like furniture, change rooms on your own terms." I made myself a sandwich that tasted better than it had any right to, and I ate it at the counter with the back door cracked an inch, because Clara always said a meal was more honest with a bit of winter air in it. The lake was still frozen solid, but there was a dark seam cutting toward the dock, a line where the thaw was getting ready. I remembered the sound it would make in April, that deep, almost animal groan of the water remembering itself. I hoped to be here for it, and I hoped in a way that didn't feel greedy to hear a different water in a different place making its own case for spring. Around 3 o'clock, Frida knocked, that back-of-the-hand courtesy of a neighbor who keeps your dignity in her pocket with her house keys. She handed me an envelope with a smudge of blue ink on the flap. "This came to my box by mistake," she said. "I told Harold if the post office insists on messing up the street, I'll mess up their sense of humor." She peered past me into the kitchen. "How'd it go?" "Like a bridge inspection," I said. "Found the rust, scraped it, sealed the beam." She nodded, satisfied, as if I'd said the pie had cooled properly. Then she looked at the key on the table. "That's new," she said. "Old," I corrected. "New to me." "Where's it go?" "A door that knows my name," I said. And she smiled like a woman who keeps her curiosity tucked under a blanket until the time is right. When she'd gone, I called Lise. She answered from a campus hallway that echoed. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hey, Lise," I said. "How are your curves doing?" "Still apologizing?" She laughed. "Less. I told them to mind their own business." "Good." "Listen," I said. "How do you feel about learning how different water smells?" "You're taking me somewhere," she said, not asking. "I am," I said. "Soon. Somewhere your grandmother stashed a piece of our life." Silence. Then the sound of a young person's happiness finding its footing. "Where?" "I'll tell you when I buy the tickets," I said. "For now, practice saying, 'thank you,' in a language you don't speak yet." She squealed, which is the only right sound some news can earn. "Your mom sent me a picture of the blue scarf," I said gently. "She's trying." Lise let out a softer, deeper sound. "You sound lighter," she said. "I am," I said. "Paper has done some of the heavy lifting." "Grandma would be smirking right now," she said. "She would," I said. "She'd pretend not to be proud of me for making a list, and then she'd steal my pen." We said goodbye the way you do when you're walking towards something together, even if you're in different towns. After the call, I stood at the window again. The seam in the ice had widened. A crow hopped along the shore with the purposeful indecisiveness of creatures who trust their instincts more than their maps. Evening found its way over the ridge. I lit the fire, poured a finger of the scotch Clara had told me to save for when the thing you hoped would work actually worked. I held it in my mouth and let it teach the cold a short lesson. In the light from the hearth, I opened Clara's letter again. The line about foundations stared up at me. Foundations don't beg to be kept. They decide what gets to stay. I thought about the county conference room. The way fluorescent light made everyone more honest than they wanted to be. I thought about Hans's jaw, Gretchen's folder closing, and Jens's polished concessions. I thought about Oscar's pen an inch from the pad, and how many men like me had found their spines again on the strength of a sentence that sounded boring on paper but felt like granite underfoot. When the flames died down to coals, I got up and did the small chores of a life. I set the kettle to boil for the night bottle, rinsed the coffee pot, and laid my keys in the cracked ceramic bowl on the table where they had lived as long as the bowl had tolerated them. I touched the brass key with the red ribbon and left it there on the table, not hidden, not displayed. The house knew it. I wanted the house to know I'd made a choice. Before bed, I wrote a short note in my square handwriting and left it on the kitchen table where Sunday sits. Sunday, 2 o'clock, pie. Then beneath it, smaller, soon, tickets. I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, the second one from the top complaining under my left foot more than my right, as always. In the bedroom, I stood a moment in the doorway and listened to the quiet. Houses earn their quiet. It should be paid attention to. I lay down on the side where I sleep now and put my hand where Clara slept. The linen was cool, the absence not theatrical. It was a still geography. I slept. I dreamed of 2 doors. One old, one new. Both open without me having to push. When I woke, the light through the south window was clean. The lake seam had split another inch. The house was warm. My name in my voice sounded decisive. And somewhere far from Vermont, a woman named Annalise was opening windows in a white house with blue shutters, saying into the empty air the English word for welcome, as if it were a prayer you could fold and carry in your pocket to use when you needed to remember how to be a man who chooses his rooms. The trip. Airports are designed to make you feel like anyone else could be you. That's their trick, their kindness, their insult. Rows of bodies funneling toward gates, each of us with a number stapled to a time. I wore the same black coat I'd worn to Clara's funeral. Not because I needed it where I was going, but because I needed it for the space in between. In the security line, a boy ahead of me clutched a stuffed whale with the easy confidence of the very young and the very old. His mother bent down and told him the whale had its own ticket. He believed her. I wanted to. I packed light, 1 suitcase, a folder with copies of papers Oscar had insisted on, the deed to the lake house, the cease and desist letters, and a letter authorizing him to sign for me while I was out of the country. Into the inside pocket of my coat, I slipped Clara's navy envelope and the brass key on its red ribbon, not for a purpose, but for its meaning. At the gate, I took the aisle seat. I used to take the window when Clara traveled with me. She liked the horizon under her, the geometry of fields squared into obedience, and the turns of rivers that refuse to be organized. Alone, the aisle feels honest, the small freedom to stand when your blood tells you you've been pretending to be a statue too long. The plane pushed back, paused on the tarmac as if it needed to remember how to take charge, then turned toward the runway. Wheels up. Vermont flattened under us into a patchwork of winter's choices. I closed my eyes and took inventory the way I learned to on long work sites. The mental walk-through of a project's boundaries. House in order, notices sent. Hans is kept in check by the kind of paper that matters. Gretchen is practicing a kind of softness that might one day become trust. Lisa's text from the night before, teach me to say thank you in Portuguese. I saved it and read it again and saved it again. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the cabin lights dimmed. The plane became a group of people, the faint hum, the click of plastic cups against trays, the quiet of people agreeing to be carried by machines they don't understand. I slept, and when I dreamed, it wasn't dramatic. A bowl of lemons on a table in a room that smelled like sun-warmed wood, a window left open on purpose. Someone was humming a song I didn't recognize and didn't need to. We landed in light. Faro looks, as you get closer, like a promise kept by other people. Square white houses, red tile roofs, a slice of sea that lay flat with the kind of confidence only water can manage. The passport officer stamped me in with the cool efficiency of a person trained to trust the shape of a book. "Bem-vindo," he said. "Welcome." Outside arrivals, a woman stood with a piece of paper that had my name printed in block letters, like she'd wanted to make sure the person coming got it right. Klaus Fischer. Anneliese Dwort. She was smaller than I expected, with the posture of someone who carries other people's days without letting them slip. Her hair was pulled back into a knot. Her mouth held the kind of smile that says, "I'm not here to entertain you, but I'm glad you came." "Senor Fischer," she said, then corrected herself. "Klaus." The way she said my name made it sound less like a label and more like directions. She stepped forward and hugged me. Not the American pat on the back that says, "This is not a hug." A simple placing of arms around shoulders. A brief press, then done. Her sweater smelled like oranges and laundry. "You have traveled," she said, as if the verb was all the proof she needed. "Come, the car is not far." In the parking lot, her car waited in the kind of shade that only a country with real sun remembers to offer. A small hatchback the color of a sky that is making up its mind. She drove like a person who respects the road more than the horn. The highway opened up, simple, low hills, a spine of eucalyptus trees, flashes of blue where the world remembers its edge. Anneliese pointed with her chin more than her finger. "Padaria," she said as we passed a squat building with a hand-painted sign. "A bakery. Good bread, honest butter. Uma Pizzeria, a fishmonger. Uma Farmacia, a pharmacy she promised I wouldn't need." The word for lemons, limos, came out of her mouth like something that had never betrayed anyone. We turned off the main road onto one that got narrower until it became a conversation, stone walls on either side, a braid of purple bougainvillea, olive trees that looked older than our laws. The air changed. Less engine, more leaf. A stray cat thought about us and then decided to forgive us. "Here," Anneliese said, easing the car into a spot that had learned her tires. "Your house." She didn't say, "the house." She said, "your." The difference mattered. White walls that made other colors honest. Blue shutters that made the light choose where to go. A roof of red tile holding its own in weather that had opinions. It was smaller than our Vermont place and more sure of itself. The front door was wood, darkened by hands. Anneliese paused before it, took the brass key from around her neck, the twin of mine, and placed it into my palm. "Clara wanted you to do this," she said, "with your hand." The key was warm from her skin, heavier than it looked. I put the red ribbon on my wrist so I wouldn't think of it as jewelry. The lock accepted it like a bone returning to its joint. The door opened without a fight. Someone had kept the hinges honest. The first breath of the place smelled like lemon oil and the sea hiding its salt in the air. Light pooled on the terracotta floor like it had been poured, not painted. The living area was one good room, a couch the color of sand, a low wooden table with soft edges like it had been rounded by years of knees and good conversation, built-in shelves with books that had traveled across languages to sit here. The kitchen was tiled in a pattern that had learned to be happy without a performance. Copper pots hung above the stove, not as decorations, but as tools waiting for their hour. On the counter, a bowl of lemons, of course. Anneliese moved through the space like a person who refuses to turn care into a ritual. "Linens," she said, opening a door to a closet where sheets breathed sunlight. "The plumber," she said, tapping a card on the fridge. "Reliable. The electrician is not unreliable." Her smile carried a history of repaired wires. She stopped by the window above the sink and pushed it open with 2 fingers. The sound the hinges made was almost a word. The air changed again. See basil from a pot on the sill, the metallic whisper of a town not pretending to be a city. She turned to me with the look of someone passing a test they wrote for themselves. Yes, she said simply, as if to bless the room. I put my suitcase down by the doorway and stood there without moving for a full minute. There are rooms you enter to take shelter, and rooms you enter the way you return a book to a library. This was the second kind. We did a short tour. 2 bedrooms, one facing a narrow lane where a motorbike would pass once an hour and make you feel like you were included. The other facing a small courtyard with a lemon tree that had been domesticated without losing its soul. A bathroom with tile that remembers water like a good friend remembers your worst day and still loves you. On the table by the bed, a photo in a small frame, Clara and Annalise, arms slung over each other's shoulders like people who had learned the same lesson at different times and didn't mind admitting it. Annalise watched me see it. Clara came once, she said, before anyone knew she was sick. She brought a notebook and asked questions in English and then in a kind of Portuguese that was only brave vowels. She laughed softly. I told her she should not apologize for the way she learned. She said she would not. I sat on the small bench by the bedroom window. Annalise sat on the chair across from me, not across a distance, but across a shared understanding. I owed Clara, she said. I owe her more than houses can carry. She helped me, how do you say, file a name correctly. She tapped 2 fingers over her heart. There were papers that said I was not me. She corrected them. She stayed until the woman in the office knew me better than I knew myself. Not because she is rude, she is not rude. Annalise's English sometimes tripped on the present tense, but the meaning never stumbled. She made a space where my name could be its own house. So, yes, I owed her. Now I do not owe. I keep. There are moments when saying thanks would be an insult because the gratitude is too big for the word. I kept my tongue and just nodded. Annalise nodded back, a gesture of respect. She stood. I leave you at your house, she said. It is yours to be quiet in. Do not be polite. Sit wherever your body says yes. At the door, she paused, glanced down at the red ribbon on my wrist. Good, she said. You will not lose it. Keys deserve wrists. Alone, I stood in the kitchen and did the simple work of belonging. I washed my hands. I opened a cabinet and approved of the bowls. I opened the fridge, milk, eggs, butter, a small note in Annalise's handwriting. There is always bread in the drawer. There was. Dark crust, clean crumb. I cut a slice and ate it with nothing. It tasted like a memory I hadn't made yet. On the terrace, the iron railing was painted a blue that could have been named a decision you don't regret. The sea lay beyond the low roofs of a dozen houses and made the sound oceans make when they are not asked to be dramatic. I sat at the small table and rolled a lemon under my palm. The scent rose, not politely. I thought of Clara in Vermont rolling a lemon before cutting it, telling Lise that it wakes the juice without wounding it. I cut into the skin with the dull knife Annalise had left to keep me honest and let the air become a letter I could finally read. I slept, not because I was tired, but because this place made sleep feel like a choice you make to participate. When I woke, the light had moved just enough to make new shadows. Not better, not worse, just different. I took the folder to the table and spread out the papers like maps. The deed, the notary letter, a draft from a Lisbon attorney whose English was fine and whose signature was beautiful. At the bottom of the packet, a single page, caretaker authorization, naming Annalise as the person who could call the plumber without asking my permission, hire a mason, accept a delivery, pay a small bill. Where a small sticker told me to sign, the pen behaved. We did not open a bottle to celebrate. We opened windows. At dusk, Annalise returned, not as a hostess, but as a neighbor with good instincts. She carried a bag with a corked bottle of something she promised wouldn't make me regret tomorrow, and 2 small paper sacks steaming at the top. Sopa, she said. And bread again. Bread is boring in the way a chair is boring, trustworthy. Sit. We ate at the small table by the open window. The soup tasted like someone's grandmother had been right about everything. The wine admitted it was young and did not try to be older. Annalise told me where to buy tomatoes without being flirted with. I told her about a lake that needed to remember it was water again. She asked about Lise with the kind of interest that has dignity. I told her about the scarf Gretchen had worn. I told her about Hansa's jaw and how a man can build a life on wanting and then declare himself surprised when the bill arrives. Annalise listened without trying to fix. She took one sip of wine, her head slightly tilted as if waiting for honesty. Children, she said, finally, do not like it when parents change the story. She lifted a shoulder. But stories change, or they break. Your wife knew that. She glanced at the photo again. She was good at deciding what could be cut and what must be kept. We washed the two bowls with water that seemed to come from a polite place. Annalise dried while I put things away where my hands wanted them to live, not where logic insisted. Tomorrow, she said, you walk. There is a market. You buy 3 things you do not need and 1 thing you do. This is how you teach your body new maps. At the door, she tapped the key on my wrist. Sleep. Leave the window open. The air here likes to learn faces. After she left, I stood at the sink in the dark, listening. Distant laughter that didn't require me to join in. A scooter passing like a thought someone decided not to say out loud. A soft clink from a neighbor's kitchen that meant someone set a cup down and accepted their evening. I dreamed again of a lemon, but this time it was already cut and someone had removed the seeds for me. In the morning, I woke before the light had finished deciding how to arrive. I made coffee in a metal pot that asked you to pay attention. The first sip tasted like patience. I took the mug to the terrace and watched the lane yawn awake. A man hosing down a stoop with the kind of care you usually save for crib mattresses. A woman sweeping a small square of shared space with devotion. A boy tying his shoes and then readying them because the first knot hadn't felt like a plan. I walked to the market with a cotton bag Annalise had hung on a hook by the door. The words of a grocery store were on it in a font that asked you not to take it too seriously. The market was what markets are, a rehearsal for how communities act when no one is watching them. Pyramids of oranges. A fishmonger who raised a knife like a conductor's baton and gave a verdict in a language I didn't need to follow to trust. A man selling bowls that had been smoothed by a hand before they were baked. I bought olives I didn't need, bread I did, and a bowl I wasn't sure about until I held it. I bought a lemon because it felt faithful. On the way back, I stopped at a shop with soaps the color of honest mornings. The woman behind the counter said, "Sandalo, sandalwood," and I smiled before I could help myself. She wrapped a bar in paper like a teacher wraps a gift for a favorite student and nodded when I said, "Obrigado," like she had graded me and decided the grade would be just between the two of us. At the house, I put the soap next to the sink like it had been missing all along. I put the lemon in the bowl. I put the bowl in a place where the light could find it without trying. I sat and wrote Lise a letter I didn't intend to send. There are tiles here that make your feet tell the truth. There is a window that makes every breath look like mine. There is a woman who knew your grandmother well enough to correct a desk clerk with kindness. I folded the paper and slid it under the bowl like ballast. The house taught me its afternoon. There is a moment when the sun hits the kitchen wall and turns it into a photograph of itself. There is a minute when the neighbor's laundry stops moving and you can tell the wind has gone to lunch. My phone, American, too helpful by half, buzzed on the table. A text from Hans. "How long will you be gone?" The words carried the tone of a man trying to schedule other people's weather. I typed, "Long enough to let the house forget your plans for it." I did not hit send. Instead, I wrote, "A little while. The house is fine. See you Sunday, Pi, when I'm back." Then I turned the phone off and put it in a drawer with rubber bands and matches, where well-behaved devices belong. I took the caretaker authorization back out and ran my thumb over my signature. We were not playing at running away. We were building an addition to a life. I slipped the paper into an envelope addressed to the Lisbon attorney and, out of habit, wrote the return address as if Vermont were still the center of my map. Then, with a pen that did not ask permission to make marks, I crossed it out and wrote the street here. Sometimes the hand has to learn what the mind has chosen. In the late afternoon, Annalise knocked with an energy that carried inside it the assumption that she would be heard. She stuck her head in before I said, "Come in," the way neighbors do when the boundary has been established by honesty and not by locks. "We buy beans," she said, not meaning beans, meaning coffee. "And you meet Señor Almeida, who sold fish to Clara and then pretended he did not know her because he was shy about liking Americans." We walked the lane. She kept a pace that let me learn how the pavement was uneven in one place and smooth in another. At the café by the square, a man behind the counter looked up, saw Annalise, and gave the kind of nod men reserve for women who could ruin their day and choose not to. She introduced me, in Portuguese first, then English, then in the third language of a hand to the heart and back. He poured coffee into cups that had seen things. He refused our money. Annalise allowed it for once. "He will charge you next time," she said. "He owes her one time only." We sat. We didn't talk for the first 5 minutes, because good coffee asks you to be still. When we did, I asked Annalise the question that had been walking next to me all day. How did she look when she came? Like a person who was not answering questions for the first time in a long time, Annalise said. Not sad. Ready. We watched a child chase a pigeon and lose on purpose, because the game is the point. Annalise's face made the expression of someone who has spent a lifetime editing people out of their bad drafts and not been paid for it, except in continuing. She left instructions, I said, tapping the envelope in my pocket. She left love, Annalise corrected. The instructions are there so you know how to carry it. When we walked back in the blue light that lives between afternoon and evening, I felt the old ache in my leg from a job site long ago. The kind that reminds you that a muscle learns the truth the hard way and never forgets. I didn't get mad about it. I let the ache pass as rent. At the house, I stood at the terrace railing and watched the sea lose color with dignity. A neighbor coughed. A dog made a sound like an agreement. Somewhere, a pan hit a stove. The night performed its small sounds and then honored its promise to be quiet. On the table by the door, the brass key caught one last edge of sun and gave it back to the room. I picked it up without thinking, felt the weight, and put it down where my hand would find it tomorrow without looking. That is the trick of arriving, to move the things you need into the place where you can reach them, and allow the old reach to rest. Before going to bed, I wrote a note to Oscar. Papers are moving. A caretaker has been appointed. I'll be out of touch for a few days. If Hans calls, tell him I'm where his mother taught me to be. I wrote another note to Frida. Would you water the basil? The plant likes you better. I wrote the name Lise on a card and left it blank because I wanted to give her the first page when I saw her in person, not give the moment away with a stamp. In the dark in a bed that didn't know me yet, and was kind enough not to pretend it did, I listened to a small clink from the kitchen. A bowl was settling. A lemon was deciding where it would rest for the night. My heart didn't race. It kept its steady pace. I slept the way houses sleep when no one is trying to sell them. Morning would bring other work, papers to handle at the post office, a walk to the edge of town where the cliff lets you see the water show its depth, a call to Lise at a decent hour to say only bring a sweater you can forgive for being wrong in a new wind. But for now, the key on the table, the windows open a couple of inches, and the sea humming about nothing in particular were enough proof. I had crossed a threshold, not an ocean, though that was true, too. And for the first time in months, I wasn't rehearsing my next sentence. I was speaking it. In the days after Annalise handed me the brass key, I began to understand what Clara had left me. A different kind of thought started to take hold. The lake house in Vermont, this small home in Madeira, they were solid, real things. But there was something else. I had with me the municipal bonds Clara and I had bought quietly over the decades, the kind of investment you never brag about because it grows best in silence. They had always been for the future, though we had never said whose. For years, future meant both Hans and Gretchen, and maybe their children. But the years have a way of clarifying who you can trust with what. And lately, my definition of future had narrowed to one person, Lise Carter, my granddaughter. She was 20 now, still with the sharp edges of someone who hasn't been smoothed down by the compromises adults call wisdom. But she had Clara's way of looking at a place and seeing not just what it was, but what it could be. The summer she turned 16, she stood barefoot on the deck of the lake house and told me the old boat house could be an art studio. She had drawn the plans in a notebook, scaling them herself, the measurements noted in the neat handwriting of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. She didn't know I had saved that notebook in my desk. It was Lise, not Hans or Gretchen, who had stayed after Clara's funeral to help me fold the tablecloths, who asked if she could take home the vase with the chip in it because it felt like it still belonged in the family. And it was Lise who, without even realizing it, had shown me the difference between inheritance as something you're owed and inheritance as something you're a caretaker of. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I had to act while I still had the will and the clarity to do it. The lawyer in Lisbon was a man named Gerd Ramos, not related to Anneliese, though he greeted me as if we'd known each other since we were boys. His office was on the second floor of a pale yellow building with a balcony that looked out over a street lined with jacaranda trees. When the wind blew, the blossoms fell like purple rain onto the cobblestones below. I took it as a good sign. "I understand you want to set up a trust," he said, switching to careful English after I stumbled over my first sentence in Portuguese. "Tell me how you see it." I told him it was for Lise alone, not for Hans, not for Gretchen. I wanted her to have enough to start anywhere she chose, a business, a degree, a home, but I wanted to protect it from the grabbing hands of parents who might see it as a life raft for their own mistakes. He nodded slowly, as if this request was not new to him. "We can make this very specific," he said. "The conditions will be binding. No one can change them except you, and only while you are alive." "Good," I said. "That's the whole point." We spent 2 hours shaping the document. Condition 1, the funds could not be used to pay off debts or loans for any other family member. Condition 2, any withdrawal above a certain amount would require her to present a plan, academic, professional, or creative, and the trustee would decide if it met the terms. Condition 3, no one but Lise and the trustee would know the exact value of the trust. "Why keep the amount a secret?" Gerd asked. "Because knowing too much can crush a person before it frees them," I said. "If she thinks it's limitless, she might not learn to build anything herself. If she thinks it's too small, she might never risk starting. It's better she just knows it's enough." He smiled in that way lawyers do when they find a rule that is more human than legal. That evening, I sat at the small terrace table in the Madeira house, looking out over the rooftops toward the line where the ocean met the sky. The red ribbon with Clara's key was still looped around my wrist. I rolled a lemon under my palm, not to wake the juice, but to keep my hands busy while my mind wandered. I imagined Lise opening a letter from the trustee one day, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, and realizing that her grandfather had trusted her in a way no one else had. Not trusted her to be good, but trusted her to be bold. There's a difference. Clara would have approved. As I thought about it, I began to suspect she had been planting this seed for years. The bonds were her idea to begin with, and she was the one who insisted we keep them separate from the accounts the kids knew about. "For when the world gets small," she'd said once, "you'll want something that can open it again for the right person." The next morning, I walked to the post office in town. It was a narrow building with a brass bell on the door that chimed like a polite throat clearing when you entered. I mailed a packet of signed documents back to Gerd. Inside the envelope, the official trust papers, my authorization, and a handwritten letter to Lise sealed in its own smaller envelope marked to be delivered when the time is right. I didn't say in the letter how much the trust was worth. I wrote instead about the time she and Clara and I had driven to a beach on Lake Champlain, and she had spent 2 hours building a driftwood sculpture no one else would ever see. I told her that sometimes the things you build in private are the ones that hold up the longest. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a kind of quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with putting things right. That afternoon, I called Lise. The time difference meant she was in the middle of her morning classes. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright but a little out of breath. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "I'm somewhere warm drinking coffee that could make a man believe in second chances." She laughed. "That sounds dangerous. Where are you?" "In a place your grandmother wanted me to see. Maybe one day I'll show you." "You mean, like, bring me there?" she asked, half joking. "Exactly like that," I said. And I meant it. We talked about her architecture project, a redesign of a public library that would make better use of natural light. I thought of telling her she'd have the money to build something like it one day, but I held back. Timing, Clara always said, is the difference between a gift and a burden. Before we hung up, she said, "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When Mom and Uncle Hans talk about you, they don't sound like they're talking about the same person I know. It's like they have a different version." I felt the words like a small stone in my chest. People see what they want to see, Lise. And sometimes they need you to play a certain part in their story. That doesn't mean it's who you are. She was quiet for a moment. "I like your version better." When I hung up, I stood for a long time at the terrace rail, the phone still in my hand, the sea stretching out in front of me like a promise I intended to keep. The twist, if you could call it that, came later that week. I got an email from Gerd confirming the trust had been established, but also noting that someone, he didn't say who, had asked about my financial holdings back in Vermont. I assured them, he wrote, that such matters are private. I didn't have to guess twice. Hans had always underestimated how many ways there are to build walls that can't be climbed. He would find out soon enough that Lisa's future was no longer something he could borrow against in advance. I closed the email, the sound of the sea filling the room, and thought of Clara's words. "When they think you have nothing, you're free to give to whoever you choose." And I had chosen. 2 days before Lise landed, I bought a second mug. Not because there wasn't already one in the cupboard. There were 3, each with a different chip that told you they had been loved by someone who believed in hard counters. But there's a kindness in setting a place for a person before they arrive. The mug was plain white. On the walk back from the square, I almost chose one with blue flowers, then heard Clara laugh in my head. "Don't decorate the welcome. Let the person do that." I spent the morning rehearsing the small paths my feet would take with Lise in the house, 2 cups to the terrace, the window latch that prefers a left-leaning thumb, the good light at the end of the hallway where faces tell the truth. It's not that I expected to run her day like a stagehand. I just wanted the house to know how to make room for her without a fuss. Annalise knocked at noon with that 3-beat rhythm I'd come to recognize. "I'm here. I'm outside. Don't hurry." She poked her head in and held up a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine. "For the girl," she said, not handing it to me yet, as if objects should have the right to choose their moment. "From your Clara." The parcel was light, flat like a notebook. Annalise kept her hand on it a second longer than necessary, and then released it into mine with a care usually saved for fragile fruit. "She gave me that a long time ago," Annalise said. She said, "One day, when Klaus has stopped trying to carry everything, give this to Lise." "Not before." Annalise's eyes softened. "You have stopped, I think." "Enough," I said. She nodded. "An agreement signed without paper." "And the girl," I said. "Curious," I said. "Brave in a way that doesn't advertise itself. She'll try to be careful and fail, and it will save her." "Good," Annalise said. Careful breaks more things than clumsy ever did. We left the parcel on the table by the door, the way you leave bread to breathe. I texted Lise our plan for the next day, airport coffee and a walk that would pretend not to be a tour. She sent back a string of airplane emojis she would have made fun of herself for a year ago. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not with the weather, some inland wind had decided the coast had gotten too proud. And not with the excitement that had lived under my skin since my 30s, the kind that used to show up before a big pour on a bridge job. I got up, made tea, and wrote Lisa's name on a card I'd been saving for nothing important. Then I didn't write anything else. Some pages deserve a first sentence spoken aloud. At the airport, I stood with the little sign Annalise had teased me into making. Lise. The letters looked like they had been written by a man who cared too much about straight lines. When she appeared, hair pulled back, the kind of backpack that admits it won't manage her life, she scanned the crowd with that family squint we all inherited from some ancestor who distrusted thresholds. When she saw her name, she smiled with kindness. "Grandpa," she said into my coat. "Hey, kid," I said into her hair, which smelled like hotel soap and breath mints. On the drive back, I let Lise describe the horizon the way 20-year-olds do when geography finally stops being a map and starts being a rumor they can confirm. She pointed at the orange groves, asked if the stone walls were old or just pretending, and wanted to know if everyone here understood they lived at an angle to the rest of the world. Annalise was waiting at the house, leaning against the doorframe like a subtitle. She hugged Lise quickly, the way women who own their time do. "Menina," she said, a little Portuguese caress of a word I didn't know she had in her pocket. "Welcome home." We didn't show Lise everything at once. You don't turn on all the lights for a person. You let them discover which switch belongs to their hand. She put her bag in the smaller bedroom and immediately moved the chair a couple of inches. The room improved. She stepped onto the terrace and let the sea introduce itself without commentary. When she finally noticed the brown paper parcel on the table, she put her hand on it and looked at me for permission she didn't need. "From your grandmother," I said. According to a schedule that wasn't mine. She sat at the table with the parcel in front of her like a patient. She untied the twine slowly because some knots are part of the message. Inside was a slim notebook, the kind Clara loved. Black cover, corners rounded from being carried. On the first page, Clara's square handwriting. "Lise, if Annalise has given this to you, it means your grandfather has done something brave. Brave looks boring most days. Keys. Papers. Saying no at the right volume. Boring is faithful. This notebook lived with me when I was learning to leave good things behind without losing them. You will have to do that more than once in your life. Write down the names of the things you refuse to shrink for other people. Also, the lemon should be rolled before cutting. People, too. Love, Grandma." Lise didn't try to be stoic. She cried the way honest people cry, quietly, like someone opening a window. She put her fingers to the ink as if heat might still be hiding under it. Then she turned the page and found more lists in Clara's hand. Not commandments, just small notes from a life that refused a performance. Don't buy shoes that apologize for your day. If a man raises his voice to make a point, tell him his point is lonely. Plant rosemary where you can brush against it accidentally. When you let someone love you, insist they learn your grandparents' names. Lise laughed at that, half laugh, half gasp. She was ruthless, she said, with respect. She was accurate, I said. We spent the afternoon not doing much. That's my favorite kind of afternoon. Lise took the notebook out to the terrace and wrote something I didn't ask to read. Annalise showed up with fish wrapped in paper and declared that today was the day Lise would meet the man who sold it to Clara and pretended he didn't like Americans. We walked to the square like locals who'd been given a script that only said, "Walk." At the cafe, the owner nodded at me with the pleased suspicion of a man whose coffee had been respected. He said something to Lise that I didn't catch. She answered in English first, then with a look at Annalise, tried the Portuguese. Obrigada. It sat well in her mouth. The fishmonger, a man with a mustache who believed in his authority, leaned on his counter and told a story involving a storm, a boat engine, and a certain American woman who had insisted on paying in exact change because paper should always be precise. Lise smiled like a student who had been allowed to cheat by the smartest girl in class. That evening, after the plates were washed and the house had made its pleased hum, Lise brought the notebook to the table and tapped a page with her pen. "Can I read you something?" she asked. "Always," I said. "It's short," she said, apologizing to the air that didn't mind. She read, "What I refuse to shrink for, my curiosity, the way I laugh when I snort, the size of the project I'm not qualified for yet, and the part of me that wants to leave when a room starts measuring me like furniture." She looked up, waiting for a correction. I raised my hands. "Looks complete to me." "I'm thinking," she said, as if thinking were something she had to confess about a semester abroad. "Lisbon has a program. My advisor says I'd be an idiot not to apply." I told her, "I can be an idiot or I can be brave, but I can't be both at the same time." She grinned. "Yes, you can. It's called being 20. What does the brave version choose?" I asked. She looked toward the dark water. "To stay here. Close to you." I had been prepared for this conversation without admitting it. I had thought about the logistics and the forms and the way bureaucracies think young people are furniture you can move with labels. I'd considered the trust, the conditions, the American habit of turning gifts into surveillance. I had not prepared for the feeling that rose in my chest now, something like relief marrying something like fear and calling it a truce. "You'll have to argue with your mother," I said gently. "I made some edits to the previous text you gave me as you had repeated yourself. I have also fixed the formatting, so the story is ready to go on. Names and surnames have been changed again to fit with the rest of the text, and I have also updated some of the grammar to American English. The content of the story has been updated to reflect the previous changes and to include the new text." The revised story continued. "I've been practicing," she said, and her face made the exact shape Clara's did when she decided to be kind after all. "Gretchen will say I'm running away. I'll tell her I'm running toward. She'll say she can't help you here," I said. "She can't help me there either," Lise said. "Not cruel, just true. She can love me from anywhere. That part's portable. We let the idea sit between us like a bowl of fruit. You don't eat it all at once. You choose the ripest and let the rest announce themselves." Before bed, Lise texted her mother, thinking of applying for Lisbon. "Don't freak out, we'll call tomorrow." Then she took a photo of the notebook's first page and sent it with no caption. Gretchen replied with a heart and a question mark, and then 5 minutes later, just the heart. Progress is sometimes that small. In the morning, I made coffee. Lise emerged in my sweater because hers was too honest with the wind. She stood by the window and read aloud from Clara's lists. "Learn to say no the way you say your name, without apology." Then she turned to me and said it. No. The word was softer than it would be in a courtroom. Better. We spent the day building the small architecture of her semester, emails to advisors, forms downloaded and printed so we could write on them with pens, a visit to the university office where a woman named Beatrice had decided long ago to save her kindness for people who didn't ask too many questions. Lise did the talking. I watched her learn how to be taken seriously in a language that didn't yield easily. Watching someone become themselves is better than television. That afternoon, Annalise knocked with her almost music and carried in a small tin from Senor Almeida's wife. She said, "Cookies for brave decisions." Lise laughed and ate one before asking permission. Good. On the terrace, Lise opened the notebook to a blank page and outlined a street she'd walked only once. Arches, gutters, the way light bends around a corner at 4 o'clock. She bled ink through the page because the pen didn't have the decency to keep secrets. "I'll get better paper," she said. Later. You'll get better at using bad paper, I said. She tilted her head. You're into this. She waved her hand around the kitchen, the terrace, the town. Using what's here instead of needing more. Like your grandmother, I said. She built more rooms with lists and lemons than most people manage with permits. As if summoned by the word, the wind carried the smell of citrus from the neighbor's kitchen. Lise grinned and rolled a lemon under her palm until the house had opinions again. That evening, we called Gretchen. No video, at Lisa's request. She'll try to read my face, she said. Let her read my voice. When Gretchen answered, she sounded tired in that way professional women do when the day has decided to be a test. Hi, Mom, Lise said. I'm in Portugal. I know, Gretchen said, a small smile audible. Your grandfather texted a picture of a lemon and then 3 dots, like he forgot how to finish a sentence. We kept it easy for a minute. Weather, coffee, the neighbor's dog that believes it owns the lane. Then Lise inhaled. I want to apply for Lisbon. A semester. Maybe more if it works. Gretchen didn't protest immediately, which is a kind of yes. Is this about running away from your studio, from the pressure? It's about running toward better pressure, Lise said. Toward architecture that was built before my great-great-grandparents learned to be disappointed. Gretchen made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't a gasp. You're your grandmother's granddaughter. I know, Lise said. I'm hoping it's genetic enough to keep me from being your daughter in the wrong ways. There was a silence that tried to be awkward and failed. Gretchen said, I don't want you to leave because I'm afraid you won't need me. I will need you, Lise said. Just not for the things you want to be needed for. That's fair, Gretchen said, and the sentence made a shape I hadn't heard from her in years. Will you send me the application deadlines? I want to see the calendar, not control it, see it. Lisa's eyes shone. Yes. Then she added, reckless and precise. And I'm staying here for a few weeks with Grandpa. I want to learn the light. Gretchen took a breath. I respected it. Okay, she said. Practice the word for no. You'll need it, especially with men who think they're the first to discover you. I've been practicing, Lise said, glancing at me. Grandpa's a brutal coach. After the call, Lise let herself cry a little. Not grief, relief. We sat on the step outside the door, the tile warm, the air making a case for evening. She put her head on my shoulder and said, she's better when you're a continent away. She's better when I stop being the version of me she can negotiate, I said. We went inside when the mosquitoes began their auditions. Lise curled into the small couch and read more of the notebook. She stopped at a page where Clara had drawn a lemon half with a heart labeled pith and wrote, Don't apologize for the part that tastes bitter first. It's what keeps you whole. She was showing off, Lise said. She wanted you to forgive your bitterness, I said. And mine. That night, after Lise fell asleep with the book open on her chest, I sat at the table and wrote a letter to the trustee in Lisbon. Applicant intends a semester at Universidade de Lisboa. Funds to cover tuition, housing, and living expenses in planned installments. Do not disclose value. I added one more line that had nothing to do with money. Applicant has the right posture for old doors. I slid the letter into an envelope and left it next to Annalisa's cookies like a bribe to the morning. The twist, when it arrived, did not feel like a twist. It felt like a correction. An email from Oscar waited when I turned my American phone on for the first time that week. FYI, Hansa's counsel inquired clumsily about inter vivos transfers to descendants. I replied politely that your estate planning is your business. Also, the county clerk confirms a certain letter of intent has lost its appetite. Good fishing where you are. T. I laughed alone in the kitchen at a lawyer's joke that had taken him 40 years to earn. Hans would be furious, first privately, then for show. Gretchen would be torn between loyalty to her brother's old scripts and the new page she'd seen today. Neither of them could touch what had just been built for Lise. Not because it was hidden, though it was, but because it had the one kind of protection adult children understand eventually, Grandma's handwriting. I carried the notebook to the terrace and set it under the bowl so the breeze wouldn't pretend to be a thief. I looked up at the dark between stars and thought of all the times I had tried to keep my family safe by being tireless. Clara had chosen a quieter way. She'd built a map and then hidden it in places people would only find if they were already walking in the right direction. When I came back inside, Lise had turned in her sleep and placed a hand on the blank page as if claiming it. I turned off the lamp and let the room accept us. The house doesn't need thanks for doing what houses do. It needs inhabitants willing to be changed by it. Morning again. And the Portuguese grandfather clock on the neighbor's wall announced it would not be ignored. Lise padded into the kitchen in bare feet, the notebook tucked beneath her arm. She poured coffee like a person who had decided to be older for an hour and then younger for the rest of the day. I wrote Mom, she said. Told her the deadlines. Told her I'll send the essay when I like it. When you like it, I repeated. Not when she does. She'll like it, Lise said. She'll tell me it's missing something, and I'll say it's missing you on purpose. She'll laugh. We'll survive it. She set the notebook on the table and flipped to a page where she had written 3 columns in a hand that looked like mine when I was 25 and didn't know I was deciding the rest of my life. Keep, let go, build. Under keep, Grandpa's lists. The smell after the terrace gets washed. The way Annalise says, good. Under let go, the habit of apologizing before I ask. The way boys look at my work like it will eventually become theirs. Under build, arches. Letters to future me. A map of everywhere I can go with, enough. The word I had promised her without teaching her its number. We walked to the post office with the trustee letter. Lise slid it across the counter like a small stone in a slingshot. The clerk waited as if judging an infant and stamped it with a sound that made the day official. On the way back, we stopped at the shop with the soaps and bought one for Gretchen. Sandalwood, wrapped in paper, tied with a string. She'll get it, Lise said. She'll smell it and not know why she misses Grandma less and loves her more. Back at the house, Annalise waited, sitting on the step like a saint who takes her holiness in coffee spoons. She looked at Lise, then at me, and lifted her chin. So, she said, the girl learns the word no. No, Lise said, grinning. The other one. Which? More. Lise spread her arms to include the sky. Annalise laughed. Good. Then you will not starve. She glanced at the notebook. Eat first, then write. We ate bread with tomatoes that had remembered the sun too well, and olives that had not learned moderation. After Lise excused herself to the terrace, she pulled her knees up under the table and wrote until the light changed its mind. I sat with Annalise in the kitchen. We did not talk about the trust because some protections do their best work unmentioned. We talked instead about chairs. She told me the story of the one in her mother's house that everyone was afraid to sit in because it had belonged to a grandfather who made rules. It was the comfortable one, she said. We broke it by being careful. I have a table like that, I said. We kept it safe. It forgave us anyway. In the evening, before the day closed its ledger, Lise came in with a sentence she wanted to test out loud. Tell me if this is a good ending, she said, reading from the page. I am not leaving home. Home is growing around me. I nodded because accuracy should be rewarded. That's not an ending, I said. That's the first line of whatever you build next. She smiled and wrote it at the top of the next page. We washed the dishes with the window open. The night brought the kind of cool that makes a sweater an honest thing. Lise dried knives and sang nonsense, which is the best kind of rehearsal for a life that intends to be lived. Before bed, she pressed the notebook into my hands. Read the first page again, she said, and then give it back. On that first page, Clara's list had grown. Lise had added her line at the bottom, small, stubborn, precise. When I grow, pull the room with me. I closed the cover and laid the book in her palm. Your grandmother would have underlined that, I said. She did. Lise said, tapping her chest. From wherever she writes now. When the house went quiet, I sat alone in the kitchen with the second mug, the one I'd bought the day before she arrived, and felt the shape of a life correct itself. There was no music, no speech, just a notebook, a lemon, a window that would be left open if the wind learned its manners. In Vermont, a lake was remembering how to be water again. In Portugal, my granddaughter was telling a city that it would have to make room, and me, an old engineer who had finally stopped measuring his worth in square footage, sat at a table and let the justice of it settle. Lise would not be smaller to make anyone comfortable. Not even me. Especially not me. Tomorrow we'd choose a bakery and pretend to have been regulars forever. We'd find a hardware store and buy a small hammer for the life she intended to build. We'd take the bus to Lisbon and get lost in a district that would teach her to ask strangers for the names of streets. She would write to her mother. Hans would send something brief. Oscar would quietly file the papers that kept our lines clean. For tonight, the notebook lay on the table like a map you don't need to fold because you already know where you're going. That was the hook I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Not revenge fulfilled, but a future that had the decency to knock. Sundays carry a particular kind of seriousness where I come from. In Vermont, they make the lake look truer, like the water has taken communion. In Madeira, Sundays arrive with the kind of light that forgives last week and then minds its business. The morning after Lise wrote, "When I grow, pull the room with me," we took our coffee to the terrace and let the day check our posture. My American phone was off. I turned it on because habits, like old injuries, ask to be acknowledged even when they no longer control your gait. Messages rolled in like a slow tide. At the top, a photo from Hans taken in a diner I had never visited but recognized anyway by the industrial pie cabinet in the background and the pie's insistence. A single slice of lemon meringue, the peaks imperfect, the crust fork crimped by a person who intended to be adequate. No text, just the image. I zoomed in on the photo. A left corner showed his hand, grease under the nail of a man who had fixed something over a sink without telling anyone, and the edge of a paper placemat where he'd pressed a pen too hard, drawing a rectangle, a floor plan, a small box for a room he was measuring, or just nervous ink searching for a container. For the first time in months, I didn't read it as a provocation. I read it as practice. Another message, this one from Frida. A photo of my Vermont porch. Late afternoon light. The boards washed the way we do in spring when the house needs to feel like a church again. On the step, a short vase of grocery store chrysanthemums, white as remedial hope. A card propped at the base. I am practicing, signed Gretchen's hand, elegant even when contrite. I took the phone inside and set it next to the bowl of lemons. Sunday has arrived, I said. Lise slid the notebook away from her plate and looked at the photos. She smiled at the pie, the way young people smile when a parent's effort shows at the edges of their pride. She touched the screen where Gretchen's name signed itself, small. Not bad, she said. Not everything, but something. We build with something, I said. Everything crumbles out of arrogance. She lifted the notebook. Keep, let go, build. She patted the bench. Your turn. We made our columns with the slow care a person gives to the first post in a fence line, the one that teaches all the others what straight means. Keep, the lake house as it is, as long as my hands know how to oil hinges, and my knees know their way down the stairs in the dark. The rosemary hedge, both of them, the one that knows Vermont and the one Annalise brought in a clay pot and sat by the door here with the grave seriousness of a midwife. The way Clara made lists sounded like good streets to live on. Let go, explaining my boundaries, storing other people's winters, the habit of answering calls on the first ring. Build, the covenant we'd spoken of and never signed, the one that made paperwork protect what love had always protected without witnesses. 2 Sundays a month that belonged to Pi, with or without pies. A scholarship in Clara's name that did not apologize for being small. Lise printed our words in her architect's hand. "What's the covenant?" she asked, though she knew. "Oscar will file it this week," I said. "A conservation easement on the acreage around the house. Clara's garden becomes law, not sentiment. No developer can break it. No clever letter can move it. And the house itself becomes a life estate in my name. If and when I leave of my own choosing, the line of succession is not an assumption." "Mom and Hans," Lise said carefully. "Will be invited to a table, not to a cash register," I said, "if they've learned to sit. If not, the table will still be set." She drew a tiny square next to the word table and labeled it, "Yes." She drew a lemon and labeled it, "Yes." She drew a thin line under build and left it open for the kind of work you don't yet know to name. Annalise knocked her rhythm. "I'm here. I'm outside. Don't hurry." She stepped in and looked at our page as if it were a map she'd walked before and didn't need to correct. She set down a paper-wrapped parcel and announced, "Bread that forgot how to be modest." Then she glanced at my phone. "America has asked for your attention." "Pie and flowers," I said. "Ah," she said, "the syllable of a person who knows that small acts are the only acts and all others are theater." "Good. Then we can eat." We ate in the right order. Bread first, then the olives that insist on being part of any decision, then the tangerines that break clean. Lise read a line from Clara's notebook about arranging your kitchen so that walking to the knife takes the same number of steps every day. That way, Clara had written, the days carve themselves into a groove you can return to when the world begs you to be younger than you are. "Grandma never forgave the world for that," Lise said. "She forgave. She didn't comply," I said. Different muscles. By midday, the heat had crept up on us the way forgiveness does, soft, and then suddenly there. Lise took the bus to the university office in town to speak with a woman named Philippa about forms that needed to be signed in blue ink because black ink had disappointed someone in 1998. Annalise went to her sister's house to argue kindly about the proper size of onions. I stayed with the house, which is a way of saying I stayed with myself. I opened the email from Oscar I had been pretending to ignore. It was as dry as winter wood and twice as useful. Subject, Filings Klaus 1. Clara Whitaker Garden Covenant recorded at the county, instrument number 241178. Permanent conservation easement legal description attached. 2. Life estate executed, remainder interest per your instructions. 3. Notice of non-representation reissued in light of recent inquiries. 4. Your son's counsel withdrew their informal request for capacity assessment. I assume Portugal helped. Also, Frida says the basil is thriving and that your porch looks smug. I printed the covenant because some facts want to sit heavily on a table. The legal description read like the world's most boring poem. Meets and bounds, degrees and minutes, iron pins set, stones found. I traced the line with my finger, knew exactly where the paper meant. The notch where the birch gives up pretending to be big, the slope where the snow lingers when the rest of the yard has agreed to spring, the spot where Clara once decided to plant thyme because no one ever regrets a little more time. The clerk's stamp at the bottom looked like a seal of approval from an indifferent god. It comforted me anyway. Another email arrived while I was hunting for a paperclip worth trusting. This one from Hans. No subject. Dad, I don't agree with what you've done. I think you're making it harder than it needs to be. I think you like making it hard. But I watched a guy fix a cabinet hinge yesterday. Then I did the next one. It wasn't as hard as I thought. I'll be at Whitman's at 2 o'clock next Sunday. Lemon pie isn't great there. That seems to be the point. I sat with that for a long minute, reading the spaces more than the letters. Hans had found a way to talk to himself without using me as a mirror. That was more than I had asked for. It was exactly what I had wanted from Gretchen. A photo of the sandalwood soap on her bathroom sink. The string tied in the same knot the shopkeeper had used because Gretchen is a curator even when no one is watching. The caption, "It smells like a house that doesn't need my approval." Then I told my team I'm going off-grid Sundays from 1 to 5 o'clock. I told them it's a religion. It is. I wrote back, "Pie is a sacrament if you keep your mouth shut while you chew." She heard it and did not try to improve the line. Progress. In the afternoon, Lise returned, bureaucratically triumphant. "Philippa loves stamps," she reported. She and Grandma would have gotten along, rules as acts of kindness. She handed me a stack of papers flagged with colored tabs. "Sign here, here, and here. Don't read the parts that were never meant to be read. Read the parts where someone bothered to be human." We signed at the table with the windows open. A breeze came through with the shamelessness of a third child. The lemon bowl let out a scent as if to say, "Fine, stay." I sealed the envelopes and Lise wrote addresses in a hand that a postman would respect. "You have a steady line," I said. "I've been practicing," she said. "Not perfection, steadiness." We walked them to the post office because walking paper to its next life feels like paying respect. On the way, we passed the fishmonger stall. He pretended not to see us and then gave us a discount that insulted neither party. Annalise met us on the square with a bag of beans and stories about an aunt who would not be outdone by death. "She insists on living bigger because the dead cannot argue," Annalise said. "I think your Clara would approve. She was good at enlarging without leaving." That night after dinner, eggs, tomatoes, bread again, because new lives do not require new recipes, we sat on the terrace and listened to the small sounds that mean a place has agreed to hold you. Lise spoke her application essay out loud and didn't ask me to fix it. She didn't have to. The sentences had already found their shoulders. "I'm not going to tell them why I deserve to be here," she said. "I'm going to tell them what I'll carry when I leave." "Take a lemon," I said. "Two," she corrected. "One for the road." My phone buzzed on the table as if it wanted to remind me of its existence. A message from the Lisbon trustee, "Trust instrument complete. Disbursements are scheduled per your note. No valuation disclosed. Applicant posture appropriate." I laughed at the last line, a lawyer showing off, and showed Lise only the sentence she needed, "scheduled." She nodded like a person who has learned to receive without treating gifts as debts. We turned the phones face down and let the evening take responsibility for what belonged to it. The sky lost its blue the way people lose their temper, slowly, then all at once, and then with remorse. In the dark, the town felt like a pocket that had been sewn shut and then realized it could still hold a hand. "Tell me something true about Grandpa," Lise said, half teasing, half archival. "I resent the word, Grandpa," I said. "Then I forgive it." "Something else," she said. "I am less angry than I was and more dangerous," I said. "Because I finally like boring power, the kind stamped in courthouses and filed by men in plain suits." "Something not about law," she said. "I am building a life that fits in two places," I said. "I did not know you could do that without splitting yourself." "Turns out you can," I said, "if you stop auditioning." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I like your version," she said. "Keep it." We were quiet a long time. The sea below us made its case for permanence. Somewhere a door slammed. Someone apologized, and a radio negotiated with a cook. I held the brass key without looking at it, my thumb finding the nick I had not put there. I realized then what detail had been bothering me since the first day. The ribbon was red, yes, but the knot was Clara's, not Annalise's. A double half hitch with a drop of dried something that might have been lemon juice. She had tied it herself, months, years ago, on a day when the future needed a string. "Grandma did that," Lise said as if reading my mind. "She did," I said. "She did a lot without putting her name on it." "Like this," Lise said, and tapped the notebook. There's a page at the back she left blank on purpose. We turned to the last page. It was thick, whiter than the rest, waiting. Lise handed me the pen. "Write her something," she said. I started to demur. Sentimentality is a room I prefer to walk past. Then I wrote with my neat, stubborn print. "Clara, the lemons are behaving. Lise is louder than she thinks and quieter than she fears. Hans can fix a hinge. Gretchen can turn off a phone. I can sleep. Annalise guards what matters. Your garden is law now. Your lists are a city ordinance." I did not make a speech. I learned to file. Lise read it and didn't comment. The best edits arrive as silence. We closed the notebook and placed it under the bowl to teach it to wait. Inside, something settled. Not the house, not the island, not the blood. The line that had stretched thin between two lives got thicker, braided with use. The days that followed knew their script without asking permission. Lise took the bus to Lisbon midweek with a backpack that had learned how to be useful. She stayed 3 nights with a student in Alfama whose windows refused to close against singing. She texted me 2 photos, a staircase that forgot symmetry on purpose and a napkin with a lemon drawn on it by a waiter who was flirting with the table, not necessarily with her. "I told him I'm committed to citrus," she wrote. He said, "Me, too. We will survive it." Gretchen sent her a voice memo that started to give advice and ended by recalling a night when she and Clara had sat on the Vermont porch counting satellites and pretending to know the names of constellations. "Bring me a bar of soap that smells like the way you feel when you're brave," she said at the end, almost whispering. "You're braver than my rules." Hans called me on a Sunday from a diner I didn't recognize. He didn't put me on speaker. He didn't try to sound casual. He said, "Lemon pie still isn't great." Then after a breath, "But it's not about the pie." He told me he'd turned down a listing that would have made him money and made someone else's life smaller. "I didn't want to," he admitted. "I wanted the number. But I remembered your, what did you call it? Boring power. So, I told them to keep the house. I said I'd help them find a roofer." He laughed, surprised at himself, not smiling yet. I wrote their number down on my hand like an amateur. Then I fixed their back door because I was there. "Good," I said, which in our family is the nicest thing you can say to a man who is practicing not being a boy. Oscar mailed me the recorded covenant, embossed where seals are embossed. On the line labeled "Description of Protected Values," he had written per my request, in a hand so neat it could have been judged, "The rosemary hedge, the lemon tree, the path where people have learned to walk more slowly." The clerk had allowed it. The state, for once, had decided to be human. I went back to Vermont for a week in early spring to see if the dock still remembered me. It did. The lake performed its old miracle, ice cracking along a seam like a mouth unlearning a lie. Frida watched me from her porch with the kind of ministry neighbors provide when religion fails. I stood with my hands in my coat pockets and didn't need to narrate the sound. When the last sheet of ice sighed and let go, I said out loud to no one there, the map folded along the right crease. On my porch, another vase, cheaper flowers, same hand. "I am practicing," Gretchen had written again. Practicing, I realized, is how people love you when they cannot yet bear to be corrected. I set the vase on the table and let it be homely and sufficient. 2 days later, before I flew back, I met Hans at his diner. He had grease on his cuff and didn't apologize for it. We ordered pie and ate it with the seriousness of men who understand that dessert can be work. We did not talk about the house. We did not talk about Portugal. We talked about hinges. He told me one of his deals had collapsed because a buyer decided at the last minute he wanted a house that would make his brother jealous. "Don't buy anything to punish someone else," I said. Hans admitted wincing at his sermon. I heard myself and hated myself. He bought another place anyway. It'll punish him later. We paid cash. We took our time standing up. In the parking lot, he hugged me like a man who had finally found a use for his arms that didn't involve carrying only himself. "See you next Sunday," he said, "or the one after." Back in Madeira, Liz hit send on her application with a kind of ceremony I admired. No screenshot, no post, just a hand on the trackpad and a nod to the air. Annalise held a small party that was not a party. Beans and onions and bread and a story about a priest who had tried to ban dancing from a wedding and been corrected by the mother of the groom with a spoon. The spoon survived, Annalise said. So did the marriage. The letter from the university arrived in an envelope that I knew was bearing more than paper. Liz opened it in the kitchen with her mouth set like a person who values doors that open the right way. She read the first line and then put her hand on the counter the way people do when a wave lifts them. "I'm in," she said, quiet as a blessing. We didn't jump. We didn't perform. We stood still long enough for the news to settle where bodies store their promises. Then we went to the square and bought 2 pastries we didn't need because sugar belongs to victory as salt belongs to grief. That evening, I took Clara's notebook from its place under the bowl and wrote on the inside of the back cover in small print, "Justice came on foot." It asked for water, not applause. I closed the notebook and set it back where it had been doing its best work, in the shade, underweight, at peace. The last light left the terrace like a person backing out of a room so they wouldn't make our conversation about them. Liz leaned on the rail and told me what she planned to do first in Lisbon, find the oldest door that would tolerate her and measure it without touching. "So I know where to begin," she said. Annalise came by with coffee because evenings, like old friends, are better when they don't ask you to prove you're worth their time. We said very little and meant it. The sea below was not interested in our legal victories or our tidy narratives. It had other work, pulling and pushing against a shore that had been both enemy and lover. The air smelled like a lemon surrendering in stages. My phone buzzed once more. A clip from Oscar of the county recorder's cursor blinking where my name now lived next to Clara's in a column that would outlast everyone in this room. A note from Frida, "The basil forgives you for leaving. It prefers being watered by the old neighbor lady who knows its name." And a photo from Gretchen, her hand ink smudged, crossing out a sentence in a presentation that had apologized for taking up time. "Practicing," she wrote again. I wrote back, "Me too." I did not send a message to Hans. I did not need to. The hinge would do the talking in his kitchen when it opened and did not complain. We made one more list because lists are how our family lets time pass without worrying it has forgotten us. Keep pie on Sundays, even if it is bad. Let go, permission from people who love us to be smaller. Build a bench by the lemon tree here and a bench by the rosemary hedge there. Places where the same body can rest without explaining why it is allowed to belong to 2 climates. When Liz went to bed, she left Clara's notebook on the table, open to the page where she had written, "When I grow, pull the room with me." The house took a breath and held it for us. I turned off the light and stood for a moment with my hand on the doorframe, the way men do, not because they are sentimental, but because one deserves to know whose weight it has carried. Justice did not arrive with a flag. It did not slam a gavel. It did not look good on television. It looked like pie photos and grocery store flowers and a signature at the bottom of a page no one will frame and a girl speaking Portuguese with the right mistakes and a man learning to prefer hinges to arguments. It sounded like paper sliding into a file and a key answering a lock and ice breaking itself on schedule. It felt like a table finally cleared of boxes. I went to bed in a house that knew my name in 2 languages. The brass key lay on the table within reach, but no longer seemed to need an owner. It had found its home.